Well, good evening, and welcome to Israel. Well, a virtual tour anyway, right? I just wanted to start with a psalm that almost every time when we've actually ascended the road, which is just a freeway that goes from the Dead Sea up to Jerusalem. By the way, with Jerusalem, you never go down to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is always up, even if you're coming from the north, even if you're coming from uphill. Jerusalem is always up. You always go up to Jerusalem. That's the way it is in the Bible, and that's the way they talk about it in Israel today. We're going up to Jerusalem. But Jerusalem's about 2,400 feet in elevation. You're going up there, and we would read on the bus the Psalms of Ascents. So you've got a series of psalms that are short and very, very uplifting psalms. So a couple of them are sad, and a lot of psalms can have that heartfelt sadness to it. But one of them is this, Psalm 122, which is really my favorite of the Psalms of Ascents, of David. I rejoiced with those who said to me, "Let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built like a city that is closely compacted together," and still is, by the way. "That there is where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord according to the statute given to Israel. There the thrones for judgment stand, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security within your citadels. For the sake of my brothers and my friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your prosperity." A psalm all about going up to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage, because you would recite these on your way up to the temple as you would go to do whatever you do, more particularly like 3 times a year, going into the different feasts, but they had other feasts there too. And that's what that psalm is all about. And you've heard many quotes from that before. So, Father, thank you for tonight. Lord, fill us with your Spirit, all of us, Lord, and give us ears to hear. Lord, thank you for giving us eyes to see. Lord, even though these are pictures, bring us there. Bring us close. And most of all, bring us closer to you than we ever thought possible. Because, Lord, these pictures are of your land, of the events that you orchestrated, even all the way up to today. And your people, still your people. You made that everlasting covenant. Thank you for being so faithful. And with that, we know, Lord, also how faithful you are to us, even when we're faithless. So thank you, Lord. Show us your land. Show us your people. In Jesus' name, and everyone said, amen. All right. Now, for those of you who might be streaming, and there's a lot of people that were streaming last night, so talking to you guys on the camera there, just to let you know that we've had a few, our internet runs a little slow here sometimes because we're up in the Sierra foothills and things can run a little slow. So if there is a little dropout or buffering that occurs, hang in there because it'll be back. So we just want to let you know it'll come back very shortly. So just a little technical thing that right now we can't avoid. So with that in mind, we started out yesterday just talking about Israel and Eilat Mazar, who was one of the great recent archaeologists there in Israel, who had her base in Jerusalem and was excavating the city of David, which I will show you in just a little while here as we get into this in the second half of our evening. But when it came down to, is this really archaeologically and historically true? Were the Jews really God's people? Was Jerusalem really God's city? Was the land really God's land? And she said, let the stones speak. In other words, you don't have to trust anybody's opinion. Go do your own homework. Let the stones speak. And as you've already seen, Israel has cornered the market on rocks and stones. And some people have gone there and listened to guides and listened to Bible study teachings and whatever at the sites. And all they end up saying is when you go from site to site, more rocks? Very quick story as we begin. We do tours that also go to Turkey and Greece, because that's all Book of Acts stuff. There's so much of it there. Many of the letters, Paul's letters and Peter and John, their letters went there into Asia Minor, Turkey and what have you. And when you go to places like the ruins of, let's say, Thyatira. Thyatira has very, very small ruins in a little town square in the middle of this remote city in Turkey. And our guides, who are Muslims, can't figure out why we want to go there. There's nothing there. Go someplace else. Yeah, we know it's part of the Bible, but there's just nothing there. And what they don't understand is that there just may be rocks there, but they have meaning. Because in the Bible, there were people who lived among those rocks, those fallen columns and busted up arches and carvings and whatever that was there, and even just raw stone. And when you see it, suddenly you read the scripture and it comes alive. This is tangible now. Your faith brings on an air of tangibility. And it's amazing. And then from there, we also visit a site that all of you have heard of called Troy. Ancient Troy. Wow, Trojan War. Well, there you go. And you walk around Troy, and you know what runs through your head? More rocks. Because it lacks biblical significance. You know it happened in history. There are lots of legends attached to it. But it lacks that biblical significance, so it's cool to see it, but the weight that lands in your heart is just not there. So Eilat Mazar had the wisdom to say, you want to know if it's true or not? Let the rocks speak. Let the stones tell you the story. And there are a lot of stones in Israel that tell the story. So we begin to move into Jerusalem. The first place that we hit as we're moving in there, and if I can show you on this map here. Yesterday we started here, went up here to this is Caesarea, Mount Carmel, down to Megiddo, over to Nazareth, up to Sepphoris, over here to Mount Arbel. Here's the Sea of Galilee, Magdala, Capernaum, Chorazin, Bethsaida, land of the Gadarenes, all in this area right here. And then way up here to Caesarea Philippi and Tel Dan. I showed you that Mount Hermon up here where the water comes from for the Jordan River, and the Jordan River flowing here. And then from there, down here to Beit Shan, I told you about that. Of course, where the great modern city, or Greco-Roman city of Scythopolis, built around that ancient tell known as Beit Shan, where the Philistines had their outpost and killed Saul and Jonathan there. And then from there down the Jordan River to Qasar al-Yahud down here, which is the original baptism site, somewhere within a mile or so of that location, that dirty, muddy water. I won't let people get in, with the lane line dividing Israel and Jordan there. And then from there to Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And then down here to En-Gedi, which is that oasis where David hid out from Saul and cut the hem off of his garment and then presented it to him at a distance, saying, look, I could have killed you, and I didn't do it. And then from there down to a place called Masada, which is right over here. And that's where we ended yesterday. Now, where we're going from here is back up here and then over to here. And on the way in, there's this thing that is a sheepfold. Now, when you hear about sheepfolds, of course, you think of a little fenced-in area and you've got sheep in there. Well, this is how they used to do it back in those days. This is a layer of limestone rock. It's like concrete. It's just limestone. It's like a ribbon of rock. But underneath where that cave was, it used to be all solid rock. But because it's layers of different types of stone, underneath was limestone that was like chalk. And thousands of years ago, somebody got in there and just started hammering out all the chalk. And they took that thing back about 30 feet. And it's really smelly in there because they still keep sheep in this cave. But you'll notice there's a stone wall off to the left that kind of cuts over in the front of that thing. And this is Bob Scott. Some of you know him from Calvary Chapel up there in Oroville. Bob is standing right next to the wall, which is now, by the way, in just a few years, largely fallen down because this isn't maintained. It's not a park. It's not preserved. Jewish kids who live in a Jewish neighborhood just above this will go there and they'll have like parties down there, and they just kind of knock it down because they don't even know what it is. They have no appreciation for it. But this thing, this particular item here, site, may or may not be something that King David ever saw or that somebody else in the Bible did, but if you were, where you're looking at this, if I were to do an about face, whoosh, there's a valley and Bethlehem's right there. So is this maybe where some of the shepherds saw the angels the night Jesus was born? Maybe, maybe not. There's no way to know that. But what's really significant about this thing is that Jesus said, look, I'm the good shepherd over there in John. You notice in John chapter 10. But then he says, I'm the gate for the sheep. And if you want to come in, you've got to go through me. What the shepherds would do is they would herd their sheep in right about where Pastor Bob is standing there. And they would go inside the cave, but there were no wooden gates or metal gates or anything. The shepherd would lay down right across the opening where Pastor Bob is standing right there. And the sheep can't get out without stepping on the shepherd, and nothing can get in without stepping on the shepherd. This is John chapter 10 in real life. Right here. When Jesus spoke, remember, the people connected with him. He didn't speak in some huge esoteric intellectual way. He wanted the people to know what he was saying. He did not want to be misunderstood. And if we start studying the Bible from that premise, a lot more questions arise. Well, this is mysterious to me. It wasn't to them, so what did they hear? Go find out. And suddenly the doctrine stays the same, but the message just explodes off the page. And there are ways to find these things out. People that write about it, and there's a lot of books out there, but you got to read. But they're in there. That's an ancient sheepfold. And here is, once again, Matthew Shepard, who had our pulpit a few years ago, and he's right across the entrance right there in the sheepfold. If this were a real sheepfold in operation, the sheep would have to go across him to get in and out. That's what it would have looked like in those days. Well, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. That's the picture of it right there, and that's what Jesus was communicating to them. Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the stones have a story to tell, Doron Spielman said. A story not only about Jerusalem, but rather it is all the stories of our people, both in the land of Israel and in the lands of exile. It is as if the stones of Jerusalem gathered the stories in our absence, catching them out of the air, storing them away safely until a time when we need to hear them, to remind us how we longed to come home. This man is not a Christian, but he is the overseer of the archaeological dig at the city of David. And he worked under Elat Mazar until she passed away. He's not the head archaeologist. He's the manager of the entire facility. I'm making a big deal of it because in the second half of the evening, you're going to see the city of David and why it's the most important archaeological dig, arguably, in the whole world right now, and continues to be so. That's this fellow, Doron Spielman. This is Jerusalem. Ooh. No, it really is. This is at a museum that's just inside the Jaffa Gate in Jerusalem that people call the Citadel of David. It's also known as the Citadel Museum and a few other names that they have for it. But this is what Jerusalem looks like if you just scraped everything off of it. If it was just bare to the ground, that's it. What you have here, I'm going to give it, if you don't know the geography of the Jerusalem, you miss half the story. It's crazy how this works. Let me show you this, and then I'll show you gradually as we go through the slides where some of these things were. First of all, these are valleys here, and here, and over here. These land ridges here, this is north, west, south, and east. This ridge from here all the way down to here, it's a ridge. Remember, I told you mountains were not usually mountain peaks, Mount Tabor being a notable exception. They were usually long ridges. This long ridge right here, this is the Mount of Olives. You know about the Mount of Olives. Jesus went up there to pray. He ascended off the Mount of Olives. He came down the Mount of Olives on Palm Sunday. This is the Mount of Olives right here. This valley right in here, all the way down here, and it goes way off the map and actually dumps down into the Dead Sea. That's the Kidron Valley. You've heard of the Kidron Valley or Kidron Valley? The Kidron Valley is a real steep little valley, but it's also known as the Valley of Jehoshaphat prophetically. This is the valley that is prophesied that it will have blood splashing up to the level of the horse's bridle during Armageddon. This is the valley right here. So Armageddon, I showed you the valley of Armageddon, but I told you yesterday it was a staging area. The rest of the story is that Armageddon is a battle that will rage 100 miles in every direction from Jerusalem. So the battle is not confined to the valley. The valley is merely a place where the armies gather. The rest of the war goes on, point in every direction from Jerusalem, 100 miles. And the center of all the bloodshed is apparently going to be somewhere around this valley, right here. That's the Kidron Valley. This ridge right here, now you're looking at a ridge that's called Mount Moriah. This is the place where Abraham took Isaac in order to sacrifice him at God's command. And then, of course, God stopped him, as you know, because God says, I'm testing you, Abraham, not me, to know that you know that I know about your obedience. And, of course, it became a symbol in Genesis 22 that's cited by Paul as being a symbol of Jesus being sacrificed by his Father for the sins of the world. God will provide, in that particular case, a ram, sheep, and of course he provided his lamb, the Lamb of God, to die for our sins. And Jesus died somewhere in this vicinity, either here or perhaps over here. But either way, this is Mount Moriah. Now here's the deal. The Temple Mount. You hear about the Temple Mount. I'm going to show the pictures that we have up here every Sunday morning. That's the Temple Mount. The huge wall around the base of it, that's a retaining wall. That is not the temple. The stuff that's on the picture that we had up there, of course, and you'll see it again, those are Islamic structures that are up there, but they're in the place of where the actual temple used to be. We're not putting Islamic structures up there because we like Islamic structures. They're pretty buildings, but that's about as far as it goes. But that's where the temple used to be, and Jesus spent so much time up there. And that's where actually is his ground zero when he returns. He ends up on the Mount of Olives and then walks down the slopes through a valley, comes back up through a special gate, and ends up back on the Temple Mount and takes over the world, basically. That's where he goes when he returns. The Temple Mount was right here. That's where the temple stood. 35 acres, 144,000 square meters. Go figure. You do the math. That's kind of interesting. This area right down here, this is called the City of David that I've already mentioned. That area right there, City of David, the oldest part of Jerusalem. And this is the original Jerusalem. When David conquered Jerusalem, there was no temple, there was no Temple Mount. There was only a threshing floor up here because threshing floors are always in high spots. And this was the ancient city originally of Shalom or Salem, where Melchizedek was, where Abraham paid his tithes to Melchizedek. It was in a city that was right here. Not only that, but afterwards it became known as Jebus, the city of a Canaanite tribe called the Jebusites, named it Jebus, and then along comes David. He conquers it, and he changes the name to Jerusalem. And this was David's city right here. This valley right here, this is called the Cheesemakers Valley, also known as the Tyropian Valley. This will be on the test, so don't forget. But it's the Cheesemakers Valley, and that one has a very, very important thing going on there this very day. And I'll show you that a little bit later on. But the Cheesemakers Valley is right here. It makes a confluence. We all know about confluences right down here where it connects with the Kidron Valley, and then you have this other valley coming in this way. This valley over here is the Hinnom Valley. The Hinnom Valley was a place where it had garbage dumps in there. Not only that, but there was constant fires burning in the days when Israel or Judah had gotten into terrible idolatry. They put the idols to Molech there, where they would sacrifice children in fire. It was awful. Just hideous things that they would do. And that would happen down in here. The Hinnom Valley became known as Gehinnom, which is the Valley of Hinnom, or Gehenna. which was equivalent to hell, the grave, fires, just terrible. The fires will burn and the worms will eat kind of a thing. That was this valley right here. This area right here, geographically, Mount Zion. Not spiritually. All of that spiritually is Mount Zion. This geographically is Mount Zion. I was in a hotel one day to meet a friend in a little lobby, and I was telling this guy that I was meeting there. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Mount Zion. And this guy said, you're going to Mount Zion? He's sitting down there reading a newspaper. I said, yes. He said, which one? And I said, we're going to the geographical one. He says, good. He was an archaeologist, and he was just sitting in the lobby. I have no idea who the guy was, but he wondered if I had the brains to know the difference. And yeah, okay, that's the way it works. Now you do too. But this is Mount Zion here, and the Last Supper and a lot of things took place up here. Jesus' trial took place up in here. Herod's palace was up there. Caiaphas' house, Annas' house, the upper room, all up on this ridge right here. And then the rest of it, well, that's almost inconsequential at this point, but you've got an idea of what Jerusalem looked like if everything was gone. It has a landform, and it's really steep. When you go there, you got to be ready to walk a lot uphill and downhill. Well, now there's something else I've got to take you over to Jordan to show you, and we'll come back to this. This is a church that I had mentioned last night in passing that's in a place called Madaba, Jordan. It's a Greek Orthodox church, and you can tell right here on the floor in a very irregular shape, there's this mosaic. The mosaic is a 6th century, in other words, from 500 AD-ish, a map of the ancient Middle East. And when this was uncovered by archaeologists, and then a church was subsequently built over it just to preserve it, that this place was the way that the archaeologists were able to identify a lot of the sites all around Israel and get an idea of what Jerusalem looked like. That's a map of Jerusalem. Say it doesn't look like much. It is. Now that's Byzantine Jerusalem. I talked about that last night. Remember, late Roman, so 300 years after the time of Jesus. And things had changed. This is the way Jerusalem looked, again, a long time after Jesus. But this is Jerusalem. This is a huge church here called the Nia Church. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which we'll show you that much later. This area right here, this is called the Cardo. And I have to show you that because I'll be showing it to you later because it's a major feature in Jerusalem. It's like one street that runs, by the way, north and south. Remember we talked about this the other day on Sunday morning, that to the ancient people, when we talked about Psalm 19, their north was east because it's where the sun came up. They didn't orient off of the North Star very much. It was always where the sun came up, which is, of course, why it came up in the east. They call the Orient because they orient their day off of where the sun rises. So this way is their north. But this is actually geographic north here. And this road ran all the way through the city here, and then they had another splinter of it coming across over in this direction here. The Temple Mount would have been right there. It's gone. In the 500 years after Jesus, it was nothing more than a garbage dump. Nothing up there. It's not even on the map. But this is the way they perceive Jerusalem. And why all these little pillars here? Well, I'll have to show you with my hands. When you're looking at the map, you're looking straight down on it, angel's eye view, and the road is like this. What they did to demonstrate the road is to do this. So you're seeing pillars this way and pillars that way, but it's like you're looking straight down on it, and they've opened up Jerusalem like that. That's the deal with this map. I wanted to show you that because that's the earliest map of Jerusalem known in history, right there. This is Jebus. This is what David conquered. This is in Solomon's day. It just happens to be the picture that I could get my hands on that was the best one. But this is the city of David. Up here, in this area here, this is supposed to be Solomon's palace up here. Solomon's temple wasn't even built. This is David's palace here. These are the walls around the city. This is the Kidron Valley. They made it agricultural here because they think there were a lot of farms there and they would catch water coming down here. There were springs. This is the main spring right here called the Gihon Spring. So what? Pay attention. The Gihon Spring is all over the place in the Old Testament when you're talking about Jerusalem. In fact, it's the most important feature in the city other than the temple because it's the water source for the city, the main water source. And they had to protect it, which is why it's like it's got its own little fortress right here. And then, of course, here you have the Cheesemakers Valley, again, the Kidron Valley, the Mount of Olives right here, David's palace, Solomon's palace, and then eventually above that, up on the top of the hill, that's where Solomon put the temple. This is what it looked like in the days of David. Prior to that, just kind of put a wall here and remove that palace, and this is what the city would have been like when Abraham met Melchizedek there. There were all kinds of pagan temples and altars all over that city. Melchizedek was the priest of the Most High God, or God Most High, and he was there representing Yahweh. And there is, I think, the highest probability that it was what's called a theophany or a Christophany, where Jesus was actually Melchizedek, and he made this Old Testament appearance just for Abraham, and that was here in this city. Then, a little bit later, this is Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. Here's the temple here. This is Herod's temple. Solomon built a temple. It was very small. It was on or near this site right here. This is the actual temple, but it was much, much smaller than Herod's temple. Herod remodeled the temple. Solomon's temple was roughly, I've said this before to some of you will remember this, roughly the same size as this building we're sitting in right now. Our building here is 40 feet wide and 80 feet long. The temple, Solomon's temple, was less than 40 feet wide. It was 90 feet long, and it was probably about 40 feet tall. So it was a pretty tall stone building, but it was considered a magnificent building in those days. Along comes Herod the Great, and the dimensions of his temple were much larger, but the real main feature is that it was 160 feet tall. It was a 16-story building, like a skyscraper. When he remodeled, he built big. So this is in the time of Jesus, and this would be Herod's temple, the 160-foot high building. Oh yeah, I'll show you artist mock-ups of it. It doesn't exist anymore. Jesus said it wouldn't. But all of this right here was Jerusalem in Jesus' day. Now you may be thinking, well, what about all of that? That was put in behind this wall here in 44 AD. So Jesus had ascended into heaven about 14 years before that wall was put in. So you'll often see maps of Jerusalem that have this huge wall going way out there, but it was put in by a guy named King Herod Agrippa II, who put that up, and it made Rome really mad because they thought he was fortifying against Rome, and they got real concerned. And when the Romans get concerned about you, you better duck because they're coming in. So this is Jerusalem in the days of Jesus. Here's another picture of it. Some of you have seen this before. I've used it before, but more three-dimensional. In the time of Jesus, here's the Kidron Valley. The Tyropoeon Valley goes here like this. You can see all of this is built up. This is Mount Zion. Who built that? Hezekiah. It was getting too crowded over here, so Hezekiah expands the city across the Tyropoeon Valley, and he puts all of this in. This is his city. Eventually, it gets expanded down this way and up in here, and then finally in 44 AD up in there. But what you're seeing is the Temple Mount, the temple here. They put a Roman theater here. They know that there was one in the city, but it has yet to be found. It was a major theater, but nobody's quite sure where it was. And then you have the upper room was somewhere over in this area here where the Last Supper took place. And this is Herod's palace right here. When Herod died, the Romans called eminent domain. They moved in. Now remember, I told you the Roman governors like to be down on the coast by Caesarea. But during the high holy days, especially Passover, they would come up from their luxurious palace on the coast, and they'd stay in this place here, which was another luxurious palace, which also, geographically with all of this, this is the highest point in the whole city, which means it's the most easily defended. So Herod, once again, being paranoid, wanted a defensible position, and he built a walled complex inside the walled city for him to be able to live in, but he died. So Pontius Pilate would have been in this area right here, and he would have put Jesus on trial probably in that marketplace right there on a platform that was just outside of it. This is where Jesus' trial would have been taking place. Annas' house, somewhere in this area, Caiaphas' house, probably the same house or direct neighbors. And then Jesus, when he was crucified either here or over here. Could have been either one of those places there. There's the Antonia Fortress. Don't ever believe it when anybody tells you the Temple Mount was actually the Antonia Fortress. They have no idea what they're talking about and proving their ignorance. So if you want to learn more about that, up at the church website, dig around a little bit, you'll find an essay there that has all these things about why the Temple Mount was the Temple Mount and not the Antonia Fortress. This is the Antonia Fortress right here, named after Cleopatra's favorite, Mark Antony. Yep, for real. And that was there in the time of Jesus. He was probably flogged right over here. So here's the city of David over here. Got the picture? And Jerusalem, right there. Jerusalem, according to the Jews and the Israelites always, they called it the belly button of the world. Sounds pretty strange, but of course, anatomically speaking, they said that's the middle of the body. If your body was this, Jerusalem's right there, right in the middle, which is why, by the way, David conquered that city. It was right between Judah and Benjamin in the south, with Simeon down there at one point, and all the other tribes in the north, but it's right in the middle. And he wanted to join all the tribes together because even though we talk about Israel a lot, and it was this country and all these people, they didn't get along. They were at civil war a lot, which is why David conquered the city in order to bring all the people together. Here's an aerial view of Jerusalem today. This is looking straight down on it. That way's north, west, east, south. Here's the Kidron Valley coming right through here today. This is a place called Silwan, a neighborhood built over a whole bunch of tombs of ancient kings, Israelite kings. Look at this. You can see it today, even with the neighborhood. That's the city of David right there. There it is. And then here's the Temple Mount today, as it is. It's still got the platform around it. The temple's gone. That's a Muslim shrine. That's a mosque right there. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, that's right here. So they're facing east, right at that section of wall, and they pray there because it's the closest place the Jews can get to the Temple Mount and to the temple itself. Temple's gone. So it's the closest place they can come to the Holy of Holies. And why it's called the Wailing Wall, they weep because their temple's gone. So the sacrifices have stopped, and they're weeping because they can't have the Temple Mount again. Yet, according to the Bible. But this is the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, right here. And these are the walls of the city today, right here, all the way around like that. Now, these are Turkish walls. The Turks either built right over the top of ancient walls, or they actually built their own sections of walls. But it pretty much traces the way many of the walls were at the time of Jesus, except here. The walls would have come all the way down into this area and linked over here. When Suleiman the Magnificent, as our guide says, may Allah bless his beard, Suleiman the Magnificent got some really, really good architects to build these walls, and they built formidable walls around Jerusalem. And then he comes to Jerusalem to inspect them, and he finds the wall over here. And he says, why didn't you put the wall down here? And they said, we thought you meant to put it there, so we completed your orders. And he said, yes, but I wanted the wall down here. So he had their heads cut off, and he had them buried right inside the Jaffa Gate at the city, so everybody would know, don't mess with Suleiman the Magnificent. So the walls were supposed to go all the way down here. And today, this area in here is actually Mount Zion. This is the place where you're going to find the different rooms that commemorate the Last Supper and a few other events of Jesus' day here. This is where Herod's palace would have been here, and Jesus would have been on trial somewhere in this area right here. Somewhere around here would have been Caiaphas' house and Annas' house in this area, so he would have been held at night there. That's how Jerusalem's laid out. This is historically where it is. And you can see, this is called the Old City, and it's got all these tiny little buildings in it. There's 35,000 people that live inside those walls today. Comfortably. They're happy living there. As a matter of fact, they'll fight to live there. Here's what it looks like as far as quarters go. Christian quarter, Armenian quarter, Jewish quarter, Muslim quarter, Temple Mount. That's how it's broken down. We're going to spend most of our time in the Jewish quarter. Again, here it is here. Armenian quarter is mostly residential, and it's very, very clandestine. You just don't walk into the place. They have, it's been there the longest of all the quarters and still retained its identity of the Armenian Orthodox, which was the first country in the world to nationalize Christianity. I mean, that was the national religion way, 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 way back. So they have this section right here. And of course, the Christian quarter here, as you're there, you have the all-important Church of the Holy Sepulchre right there, which we'll talk about later. And then the Jewish quarter, the western wall of the Wailing Wall's right there. And there's the Muslim quarter and the Via Dolorosa, which goes right along here and like this over to here. That's if you've heard of the Via Dolorosa. The Via Dolorosa is a traditional walk. It's not an authentic one. Be aware, archaeology has put everything elsewhere, and of all the odd things, the Vatican has acknowledged that fact. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know. I didn't want to burst your bubble, but I'm bursting your bubble. So that's the way Jerusalem is. So let's look at the Temple Mount. Here's the picture we see every Sunday morning. There's the Temple Mount. This place is big. These are cars right here. This is not the same one that I have up here on Sunday mornings because there are tour buses here as well. But from here to here is 90 feet. So that's really tall. It used to go another 40 feet up here, and then it used to go here another 105 feet down. In ancient times, there used to be a building right here that went the full width of this area here, and it added another, I think it was another 70 or 80 feet to the top. Either way, the top of a building that you only have to use your imagination to picture that would have been right here, the point was known as the pinnacle of the temple, where the devil took Jesus and said, jump off, and God won't let you fall, you'll fly, and then you'll prove to everybody that you're of God. And of course, Jesus, he got, took Satan to task on that one. But if somebody got up there and jumped off, they would not only fall this distance, they would have fell all the way down to here. This is the Temple Mount. Across from the Temple Mount, you have the cemetery. Cemetery here is on the side of the Mount of Olives. Well, I thought we were talking about the Temple Mount. We are. The reason you have this huge cemetery, the Temple Mount is right here. Right there, that corner is just right there. And here's a Jewish man here, an Orthodox Jewish man. But this cemetery is 3,000 years old. There are a lot of new graves there. I mean, thousands of new graves there. But this is the most popular cemetery in the entire Jewish world because if you're buried here, it's just a short hop across the Kidron Valley when the resurrection of the dead takes place. You get up and you walk into Jerusalem. So they all want to be buried there. Don't forget that the resurrection of the dead is a real event that is going to happen someday. The Jews believe it, the Christians believe it, even the Muslims acknowledge it, even though they're not Jews or Christians at all, but they even acknowledge it. So that this is the most popular place for Jewish people to be buried. This is also the largest Jewish cemetery in the world, and it's definitely the oldest. This is the Kidron Valley. The cemetery is right up here. That neighborhood I told you about called Silwan, all of these built over the tombs of kings. Those houses, by the way, if there's a real bad earthquake in Israel, every one of them will collapse because none of them are built to code of any sort. Somebody just put a bunch of stuff up there. But look how steep the valley is. The Temple Mount, right up here. This is the valley down here that's where the blood will run to the horse's bridle during Armageddon. So this is, of course, the Kidron Valley. And you can see how it terraced down, and it eventually goes downhill all the way to the Dead Sea. Once again, the Temple Mount, here's the buses here that we have here. This is a mosque. This is the third holiest place in all Islam. The Quran never mentions Jerusalem. It mentions a place called a faraway place, which has been interpreted by imams to be Jerusalem. This mosque commemorates Muhammad's night journey on a horse called Barak that was a flying horse that had woman's hair and a face of a woman. So, and he touched down here in a dream and ascended up into heaven in a dream, but they put this mosque there. This is called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it is the third most holy place in all Islam. That is not a mosque. That's a shrine. It's a shrine that is known as the Dome of the Rock, and under that there's this big rough-hewn rock that is believed by many, and it's possible, flip a coin, that was the Holy of Holies of the original temple. Of course, the Muslims who oversee this have a vendetta against the Jews, and they're not much happier with the Christians, so they will say that there never was a Jewish temple, and they'll even teach this to children in the schools. But this is built over a rock that they said Muhammad came to and then ascended into heaven from that rock. That's underneath this. I've never been in there. By the way, it's a very big building. It's huge. 8-sided and built in the 7th century AD, so it's very, very old, and yet it's a very beautiful building. But it says a lot of blasphemous things on the inside too, saying that don't acknowledge that God has a son because he doesn't beget, neither is he begotten. Well, they're right about he hasn't begotten, because he was never been begotten, because God has no beginning. He was never born. Where did God come from? He was always there. But when it came down to Jesus, they said he's not God's son. And that's written on the inside of this. And it basically tells you, Christians, watch your language. So it's like a threat. It's really kind of scary. But that's inside this place. This, again, is not the temple wall. It is the retaining wall. Basically, what King Herod the Great did is he took Mount Moriah. Remember the picture with the silver, mountain there with nothing on it I showed you. And he leveled off the whole mountain. I mean, he from about here on, it's all bedrock, and he just shaved it off all the way back to be able to put all of this stuff on there and put the temple up there. And then all of this underneath is a series of huge, huge, vast Roman arches that they call Solomon's Stables. Has nothing to do with Solomon, but they named it that, and that supports this entire end of the complex here. That is brand new stone there because the Muslims came in this area here with bulldozers and dug into the ground and then eventually into Solomon's Stables arches to put in a mosque that would actually seat 8,000 Muslim worshipers, to put it in there. And because they destroyed the engineering that Herod the Great had so carefully built, the wall began to collapse, so it was buckling. So they had to replace that in order to keep that whole corner from collapsing. Here's a shaft that was dug by an archaeologist, a British archaeologist called Warren. From that corner of the Temple Mount that I told you, of the pinnacle of the temple, he dug down 105 feet and went across, found the base of all the stones. It's all covered in that dirt, and he even found graffiti on some of the stones from pilgrims that would visit Jerusalem at the time of King Herod the Great, or at the time of Jesus, which means that it was exposed. It wasn't just put there and buried. It was exposed at that time. That place was big, and it was so large, and the stones are so huge that it's now being compared to, as far as buildings and the amount of work, labor, and tonnage that went into it, as being equivalent of building the Great Pyramid of Egypt. It's that big of a building structure. And this was the Temple Mount for the Jews. Here's an older picture taken probably from a balloon or maybe a very early airplane, the way it looked a long time ago. Silwan's over here. Look at this. This is the city of David. And nobody there. Here's a city that began to expand out over in this direction. This is the Jewish quarter over here. That's the Herva Synagogue, which was blown up in one of the wars and subsequently rebuilt. There's the Dome of the Rock. Here's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This platform right here, everybody see that? It's higher than everything else around here. The temple is believed to have been up here, the original Jewish temple, because the platform here also hasn't changed. Jesus said when someday not one stone of the temple is going to remain on another. And that's absolutely true. Not one stone remained on another when the temple was burned, because the gold which plated the whole east side of the temple melted in the fire that destroyed it. The Romans set it on fire, incinerated 8,000 people that were held up inside that thing. And then the gold melted down, and they pulled all the rocks apart to get the gold. The gold was subsequently shipped off to Rome, by the way, under Titus, put in the bank, and then at the time of Hadrian pulled out of the bank, and they found the dedication stone for this, that the Colosseum in Rome was quote unquote built with the gold of the temple. And it's the temple in Jerusalem. If you want to know the legacy of the Jerusalem temple, look at the Colosseum in Rome. But that's why there wasn't one stone left on another. They were all thrown down. But not so the platform of the Temple Mount itself. And here, again, it's believed this is where the temple was. But it wasn't where that dome was. Chances are. Could it have been where this dome was? Let me go back to the other picture here just for a second. Could it have been right here? That's the general theory. But remember I showed you on that other map that there wasn't even a Temple Mount indicated on the Madaba map? You see, I have reasons for showing you things. Because it was like a garbage dump. And nobody, after Byzantine times, knew exactly where the temple stood. There's a piece of bedrock that's right here, under that little dome right there, that's 8 feet higher in elevation than the rock that's under the Dome of the Rock. The bedrock that was underneath the Holy of Holies in the temple was considered the highest place still left on Mount Moriah. That would put it under this little dome right here, which that piece of bedrock right there is 8 feet higher than that sacred stone that's in there. Chances are this is the location of the original Holy of Holies of the temple. And the Muslims who oversee the Temple Mount can't for the life of them figure out why Christians keep wanting to go to this little dome. Because they look at it and they go, this is probably where the Holy of Holies was. Can you say for sure? No, you can't. But there's a whole lot of stuff on this now that indicates it's a very real possibility that that was the Holy of Holies of Herod's temple right there. Which means when Jesus returns someday and he puts his feet down on the Mount of Olives, and as I said, Mount of Olives splits, walks through a valley, comes up through the Golden Gate, and ends up on the Temple Mount, where's he going? He's going where the third temple is going to be set. And this is 100 meters north of that. The Jews have places to put a temple up on the Temple Mount if it won't start World War III, which right now any attempt would. But they could put it right there. And they would consider that the Holy of Holies. Besides, it lines up perfectly in a straight line to the Golden Gate, which Josephus described. If you look through the Golden Gate, you could also see through the Beautiful Gate, eventually through the Priest's Gate, and if all the doors were open, all the way into the temple, through the holy place, into the Holy of Holies if somebody had pulled the curtain back. It was in a straight line. That's in a straight line to the gate. Interesting, isn't it? Well, that's why we have a lot of people gathered there. The only thing the Muslims don't want you to do is they certainly don't want you to pray. But that's the bedrock right there. It could be the base of the temple. Did the Ark of the Covenant stand there? Only for a while. Remember, it disappeared slightly after the time of Hezekiah and was never seen again. So since that time, there has not been an Ark of the Covenant that inside the temple, even including to the time it was burned. They had a contingency, but the ark was gone even then. So if you're waiting for somebody to show up with the Ark of the Covenant in order to start end times prophecy, don't hold your breath. You don't need it. And even the Temple Institute will tell you, we don't need it. All we need is the altar, and we could start the sacrifices again. And that, the Temple Institute, a group of Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, that they have already built. They just need a place to put it. These steps leading up to that dome right there, that's the dome you were just seeing in the other picture, the little dome. You come down these steps and you see these big rocks right here and right here. They're used now as paver stones, but they're not just paving stones or flagstones, they're blocks put into the ground. They're of a quality of white limestone that it is believed that they are quite possibly, and again, nobody can say 100% for sure, but it's leaning very close in that direction. It's believed that they are leftover stones from the actual temple in Jerusalem. So not the retaining wall, but the temple itself. That's possibly what these stones are right here. And when you come down, because of the Muslim oversight of the Temple Mount, don't make a fuss about it. Just look down, take notes of it, take a picture, and move on, because you don't want to draw attention to them. But they are very likely parts of the original temple, right there at the base of those stairs. One other thing, just speaking prophetically, that big blue building, the dome, is right here, up in this area here. I showed this picture one time when we were doing a prophecy update. It's the coffee, I know, but these are Orthodox Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews. Here's some more ultra-Orthodox Jews over here. You have some Muslim security people sort of circling in the background, but these people are on the Temple Mount praying at the base of that upper platform that I showed you. This hasn't happened there in over 1,000 years, and now it's happening again. The Jews are now allowed to go onto the Temple Mount and pray, even though they have even been forbidden by the chief rabbinate, chief rabbi there in Jerusalem. But they still do it. And these people here are having a prayer meeting right at the foot of the upper platform, which is here. The big blue building is right there, and that dome that I showed you, the little one, is right over here off the picture. This is a picture of the south end of the Temple Mount. This is called the South Temple Steps right here. This is Gail Irwin, by the way. This is taken a few years ago. It was his last trip to Israel that we were doing. But these steps lead up to the southern retaining wall. It doesn't look much like a retaining wall. It looks more like a building, but it is the retaining wall. Behind here are these massive arches that I told you. That's the Al-Aqsa Mosque up there. This was not there in Jesus' day. The Turks put that up. It's just a wall. It's kind of there, and it's being helpful right now holding the whole thing together. But these steps used to be just a field that people would park their cars on, basically a dirt parking lot until 1986. And then a bunch of archaeologists got in there and started to uncover these steps. Well, they rebuilt most of these because they were in such bad shape. But these here, these very rough-hewn steps that you can see right in this area right here, that's all bedrock. It was chiseled out by King Herod's men to make it so that these were steps that you would ascend up into the Temple Mount, so that there were actually entrances up at the top of this wall here. There were gates, one over here and 3 over here. I'll show you one of those in just a little bit. But those steps would lead peasants up to the Temple Mount. That was the peasants' entrance. Below, going this way, it takes you right down into the city of David. And the first thing you run into as you go down the hill about 100 yards is a road. If you look down below the road, they couldn't move the road, so they excavated in front of it and behind it and found parts of Solomon's palace. Most of it's underneath a street, but they've excavated the gate and the entrance to his palace right down at the bottom of this hill right here. It's astonishing. But what's important about these steps right here as they lead up, those are the bedrock steps, the ugly ones, because they're not restored. This is the only place in all of Jerusalem that you can guarantee 100% Jesus was right there. He would have walked up and down those stairs with his disciples. They were called the rabbis' teaching steps. The rabbis would come and take their students and teach them in this area. They would gather on these steps, and you can imagine just clusters of people. I'll show you one modern version of it in just a little bit too, where people would just meet with the rabbis, the disciples, and he would teach them right there. So these steps right here, they could tell you what Jesus' feet smelled like. They could tell you what his voice sounded like. They could tell you what the voice of his disciples sounded like right there. That makes it a very special place. That's what the steps look like right here. Again, these are the recreations up here, the restorations rather. And here's one of the gates right here, all blocked up. The other one's over that way. But this is all original, carved right out of bedrock. You would go up 2 steps, pause, 2 steps, pause, 2 steps, pause. So you could say your Psalms of Ascents on the way up, or you could just sit down and take a break and meet with your rabbi or whatever you wanted to do. I love this quote. I have to tell you that I am more excited about stepping on these stones than I was stepping on the moon. Neil Armstrong, when he visited Jerusalem. That gives you goosebumps just to think about it. Jerusalem walkabout. Let me go through this stuff really fast here, and then we'll take a break. But I'm going to go sort of really quick. When you're in Jerusalem, the old city, this is on the outside of the city, you're going to see walls, you're going to see towers, you're going to see battlements. This particular structure right here, you can tell by the stones. You see this little frame around that stone right there, and a frame right there around the stone, and there's frames there. Can you see that? It's a little dressing. The middle is pushed out a little bit. The middle, which is rough and standing out from the frame, is called a boss, like, hail to the boss at work. That's the boss. But around it is the frame. That's an indication it was King Herod the Great. That was his motif. That was his style. That was his signature. Put a frame around the rock and put it in place. This tower is part of King Herod the Great's palace, which would have been over in this direction. This wall right here, and this wall, this is Crusader. This wall is Turkish. Man, you got all kinds of things going on there from all different realms of history. But that's what you have. So in Jerusalem, you have walls. Here's another wall taken with a wide-angle lens. This wall happens to be built, you can see this is all Turkish, but look, all of this stuff is kind of uneven and weird and old-looking. Nehemiah, all the way back to when Nehemiah built the walls, this is part of his walls. They built right over the top of his walls. This indicates that at one point there was a gate here. They call it the secret gate. It really wasn't much of a secret, but King Herod the Great put it in, and that was the entrance to an old gate that's now missing. This is another piece of the ancient walls here that goes back to the time of Nehemiah, the time of Hezekiah, and then above that, the Turks. We're talking right out of the Bible. These are the walls. And further, you have retaining walls. This is at the city of David. This is a retaining wall here that held up a palace over on that side. Guess whose palace? King David's. This goes back 3,000 years, so it even predates the time of Hezekiah, of course. Here's the retaining wall of the Temple Mount here, and this is the southwest corner of it. This is inside the Turkish walls here, which you can actually walk all the way around on that. And this area here, an ancient road that was beautifully paved, but it was crushed here when a huge arched bridge that came down with stairways on it collapsed when during the siege of Jerusalem, and it actually crushed in these paver stones, which are 2 feet thick, and the impact did that to them. These rocks right here, which I'll show you more of later, those came off the Temple Mount. They are not part of the temple, but during the siege in Jerusalem, they were just dumped there. When I first started going to Jerusalem, ground level was up here. You could see this slot right here, which was who knows what it's for, but somebody put it in there after the fact. But it used to be all dirt all the way across here. And then, of course, the Second Intifada kicks in, an uprising among the Palestinians, and Israel, goes, a lot of turmoil that was going on there. And nobody visited Israel for 4 years. And I wanted to keep going, but nobody wanted to go with me, so we kind of shut it down for a few years. But when I came back, all of this was excavated. And when they dug down in the dirt, the archaeologists found all of that. And it was part of the temple complex from Herod's time. It was destroyed in the time of the Romans. And so they decided, let's just leave it. Let's not even clean it up. Let's show people the destruction of the Romans. That's this part right here. But this road, as I said, we're going to come back to this road in our second half tonight because it's one of the most important things in Jerusalem to this very day. You have, again, here's the chunks of stones that were part of a wall that was up above. Look at the Herodian blocks here. See the frames and the bosses on the frames all around there. And the discolorations here, as you can see that some are darker and some are not. It's from the flames, chemical reaction with the heat, with the limestone. It darkened up the limestone, but before it got hit by the flames, those stones were practically white. It was not marble. It was limestone. But it was some of the finest limestone that he could find. This is the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, sticking up there. Once again, it was far higher in the days of Jesus. All of this was added on later by probably the Arabs up here. This is the Muslims of modern times up in here, but it would have been another 40 feet taller than that. These stones right here, as you can see, they're all Herodian stones. They hold the thing together. Look at the engineering on this. This stone here, 60 tons. Put into place with half-inch tolerances, each stone set back 1 inch further in just to make sure that the Temple Mount doesn't go straight up. It actually arches in just a little bit in order to hold all the mass of the weight of this enormous structure. But all of these stones huge. This was put here, by the way, by the Muslims, saying that this is where Muhammad tied up his horse. So it's, sort of a holy site. This is the way the Wailing Wall of the Western Wall looked about 100 years ago. Israel did not own the land. The Zionist movement was in its infancy, and they were buying up property elsewhere in Israel, but not so much in Jerusalem at the time. That's all the room the Jews had to pray at the Western Wall. That's what it looks like today. It's a huge outdoor synagogue, and it's open 24 hours a day, and you can go in there. They have a men's side, they have a women's side, and there the twain shall meet, but that's the way it's set up in those days. This is the men's side, and it even goes back in here and further along underground, and they have a gallery up there where the women can come into that part of it. It's a beautiful thing in there, but this is, again, 90 feet tall. But this area right here, this is called the Western Wall Plaza. So what? It's built over the Tyropian Valley. Remember yesterday we talked about a tell, how when a city is built, destroyed, and then something's built on top of it, it's destroyed, something built on top of it, it's destroyed, and things just get taller and taller and taller. The Tyropian Valley has been completely filled in by the debris of centuries of fighting. And once again, there are 16 different layers, rather, of Jerusalem under here. So if you dug down from this wall, it goes down at least 35 more feet until you get to the base of the Cheesemakers Valley, the Tyropian Valley, which runs right along this edge of the wall. This was built on the western edge of the eastern edge of the Tyropian Valley. So this is a valley here, but it's all filled in. This is the Western Wall during IDF induction. You can see the soldiers over here and the soldiers over here and the soldiers in this area here. And these are all their family members and people that came along, and they swear their oaths there. What's fascinating about when they swear their oaths, regardless of which part of the military it is. It could be a lot of Air Force and what have you. But as they're there, you have somebody shouting in Hebrew, usually a woman who is an officer, and she's leading them in their oath. And she shouts, and they shout back. And she shouts, and they shout back. And she shouts, and they shout back. And then finally, she says, B'Shem. And you hear the whole place go, B'Shem, B'Shem, B'Shem. And I mean, it echoes, so it thunders in this whole area because it's all stone. It means in the name, in the name, in the name, because they will not say God's name Yahweh's. They will simply say in the name, and they say it 3 times. That's when they have sworn their oath to the Israeli Defense Forces. And this is what is happening right here. In the meantime, you got all these worshipers back there, and they're doing their thing too. It's just a busy place. That's Jerusalem today. These are men who actually liberated the Western Wall in the 6-Day War. These are the guys, the same guys several years later as they're back at the wall. Here's the Western Wall too, up close. This is the women's side. I did not take this picture, obviously. And we support this young lady right here through our missionaries. She's one of our missionaries, and she's in England right now doing some things. But you can see the Herodian stones here. The reason those things are all rumply and looking very eroded is that they came from 2 different quarries. This one has tighter crystallization. That one has looser crystallization, and it erodes faster. But that's why the stones are different, even though they used to look all the same. You go to the wall to pray. Here's a man, a rabbi. You can tell by the black that he's a rabbi. If he's a regular worshiper, it's usually blue stripes. But this man is a rabbi, and he's praying there at the Western Wall. Look at all these papers in here. A little bit more. This guy is shoving papers in here. I took this picture, and you can see all the papers in there. Those are prayers. It's a place of prayer, but it's not only a place where you can go just to pray, and you can pray out loud. You're actually expected to, even if you don't want to. You don't have to. We talked about that the other day. Every one of these is a desperate prayer from someone who went to the wall, and they put it in there because, as they will tell you, we want our prayer in the Western Wall because God hears more clearly because it's a local call from here. So they will cram all these prayers in there, and they'll have hundreds of thousands of prayers in there before the men come, and they clean it all out. And they're actually pulling all the prayers out from between the cracks in the wall there. And then they take the prayers and they bundle them up, and they take them outside of Jerusalem, and they give them a decent burial as if it's a human being. They don't throw them in the trash. They treat each one of those prayers as absolutely sacred. And of course, it's a good place to get a nap. This is looking down from the Western Wall. The Western Wall is above, up here, looking 35 feet down. They keep excavating down, and the excavation underground, even though you can't see it unless you're down there, it continues to this day. It's a huge excavation, and it goes underground. This is a mikveh down here. We talked about that before, a ceremonial cleansing pool. They're all around the Temple Mount, where the Jews would cleanse themselves by walking down into that pool and dunking themselves, sort of a self-baptism to be born again, so they're ready to do something very sacred. But this is the Western Wall underneath. And then you have underneath the Western Wall, this was uncovered. This stone right here, there's our guide Ronnie Cohen, and this stone which runs from here to here. And up there, it's 45 feet long, between 11 and 13 feet tall, and between 11 and 15 feet thick. It weighs 500 tons. It was quarried elsewhere, brought in, and set there, once again with half-inch tolerances offset by 1 inch to hold up the retaining wall. No one knows how they did it to this day. But it's underground, and you have to go down there to have a look at it, and there's ways to get down there with a tour, and it's a beautiful area, but you can't get a good shot at it. You have to shoot it at an angle because it weighs as much as a fully loaded, fully gassed up jumbo jet. That's how much that stone weighs. And they put it in place back in the days of King Herod the Great. Here's another view of it, looking this way. And people are still putting prayers in these slots. These were added later because somebody built houses up there or something, and there were parts where they put the supports for the house in that particular area. And you have gates in Jerusalem. This is called the New Gate because it's new, and it goes into the Christian quarter. This is kind of an interesting thing that around December, you can walk in here and see Christmas trees. It's like, In Jerusalem, Christmas trees? Yeah, it's the Christian quarter. They put up Christmas trees. You have this gate, which is the Jaffa gate. And actually, there's a very, very wide open area. You can drive a car through it, but this is the original gate here. This is the Damascus gate, because the road that led out of this one a long, long time ago went straight to Damascus. This leads into the Muslim quarter. This is a Turkish motif up here, by the way, so it's not anything that's very ancient. It's only about 500 years old, which makes it new for these people. This gate right here is from Hadrian's time down here. That means that Emperor Hadrian lived in 135 AD. He rebuilt Jerusalem after leveling it to the ground and building it up as a pagan city and naming it Aelia Capitolina for a while. This was the gate that went in to that area called the Cardo that I told you about. This is on the north. So this is the original Roman gate from about 135 AD. But prior to that, you say, why don't they have anything older than that? Because Hadrian destroyed all of it. He just leveled it to the ground. This is the Zion Gate. Look at all the bullet holes here. Somebody got a tank stuck in there once during one of the wars. I mean, a lot of violence happened in this particular area. This is one of the gates that got those guys in trouble, the architects, because the gate was supposed to be way further downhill. This is the gate, the lowest gate in the city. That's the main gate that leads into the Jewish quarter. This is where I'm standing in the Jewish quarter. I'm looking out of the city right there. But this is called the Dung Gate, because all the refuse and dung and everything all went downhill. It was the lowest place in the city. So let's give the Jews that one. Seriously, anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years. This is the Dung Gate right here, and it's the entrance to the Jewish quarter. This is the Lion's Gate. Even though these are panthers, people say that they look like lions, and they were put up there by one of the sultans, and that leads into the Muslim quarter. It's also known as St. Stephen's Gate, because even though it's not that old, once again 500 years old or so, that it's built over a site where there was an actual gate, and this is where tradition holds. I think it was someplace else personally, but tradition holds that Stephen was brought outside this gate and stoned to death, as you saw in the book of Acts in chapter 7. This is the Herod's Gate, or the Flower Gate, because they sold a lot of flowers there. Once again, a Turkish gate, but this leads also into the Muslim quarter here. And this one you're very familiar with, the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is sealed up. This gate is a Byzantine gate. The original gate of the Golden Gate is right down under here, about 17 feet below in this area here. The arches were found by a very, very excellent professor, archaeologist, Dr. James Fleming, and he was walking around along this edge of the retaining wall here, fell through the lid of a grave full of bones. He took pictures of it. It's pretty gruesome looking, but there are these huge arches that had filled up with bones because they were burying people there. And those were the original arches of the gate. He documented it. He took pictures of it, the original Golden Gate, all the way back to Herod's time. And it's just right here in this area, underneath in here. Of course, when the Muslims found out about it, they sealed it up with steel reinforced concrete. So they blocked it up. This gate is Byzantine, and then it was redone by the Arabs, and a bunch of other people were involved in it. It's been opened, it's sealed. It's opened, it's sealed. It's opened, it's sealed. But now it's sealed. And as you know from Ezekiel, when the Messiah returns, he will go through that gate. So a bunch of rocks aren't going to keep Jesus out from this particular thing. Today, it's a Muslim girls' school on the other side, because a gate just isn't a hole in the wall. It's a whole complex in there, and they've actually converted it into a school on the other side. But that's the Golden Gate, and it's big, by the way. It's not small. Golden, because it was covered with gold? No. You can go to Istanbul, and the remnants of a Golden Gate are there, because Golden Gates were called that because that's where kings entered the city and exited the city. It was a gate only for them. Only they were allowed to go in and out of that gate with their entourages. So that's why it's known as the Golden Gate. It just reflects the fact that that's the gate for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords when he enters the city. See the size of the gate? It's huge. Just a big, big place. And it's in the middle of a Muslim cemetery. And another gate. This is the Triple Gate. The one I told you about, the South Temple steps, are down here. The steps that Neil Armstrong said he was so impressed with, they're just right below here. But these gates were open, and these actually have tunnels and ramps that go up to the top of the Temple Mount. This is how people entered the temple if you were a peasant. But lately they've been all sealed up. Nobody's been through those gates in hundreds of years. And then you have other gates that were excavated underneath the Alexander Nevsky Church of the Russian church in exile that happens to be just west of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. While they were putting this church in about 115 years ago now, they found all these artifacts. And this is a Hadrianic gate here. That's Pastor Jim and that's Deanne there walking through this thing. But that's one of the little known places in Jerusalem where you have the most amazing archaeology, and nobody goes there. But this is, again, another gate that they found under here. And this is a gate. There's Pastor Jim looking through it. This is a little bitty gate. This was a large gate right here known as the Mercy Gate, the Flower Gate, or the Garden Gate. Excuse me, not the Flower Gate, but the Garden Gate. But this right here, well, when the gate's closed at night and you want to come in and out of the city, you got to go through that. That is the eye of a needle. Remember, Jesus said that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. You're not going to get a camel through that. You might get its head, but that's it. Otherwise, you got to grind that camel up real small to get it through that gate. But that's an eye of a needle right there. And they've dug that up underneath this church when they were trying to put the foundations of the church in. You got all kinds of interesting things. Then you have roads in Jerusalem. This is the Palm Sunday Road. It looks fairly level. It's steep. It's like this. And when it's wet, you're sliding. It's like being on a skateboard going down this thing. But this is the road. It's paved now. There's Pastor Jim again. There's Holly right there, taking a picture, and this goes all the way down from the top of the Mount of Olives and ends up at a place called the Garden of Gethsemane, and it stops there. But this is the road that goes down. You say, well, that doesn't look that old. It's over 3,000 years old. It's just paved now. And believe it or not, as narrow as it looks, and Holly knows this very well, people drive cars up there. Jeremy had to dodge them one time when we were there. So that's the Palm Sunday Road where the rocks, Jesus said the rocks will cry out. This is just a street in Jerusalem, very typical. Look at how steep that is. These are here because they have little carts that they push around because the roads are so narrow. You got to be able to push carts up and down. You don't want to go bump, 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 bump. So they put these things in. This is in the Muslim quarter. Here's another street in Jerusalem. This is in the Jewish quarter heading in from the Muslim quarter, heading down towards the Cardo. But notice it's all limestone. This is Christian Quarter Road. This is right down the middle of the Christian Quarter. Welcome to tourism land. There it is. All the shops, every American's favorite place to go. Let's go spend money and bargain a bit. But that's the Christian Quarter Road. And of course, they do have a few cave of wonders there. This guy, whose name is Mahmoud, and I get a few things from him from my biblical dinners. He runs this place here, and it's like being in Aladdin's cave. It's quite an amazing place. And then you have doors, bronze doors like these that are at the Church of All Nations Church, which happens to be the church built right in the middle of the Garden of Gethsemane. And these doors, I took the picture at eye level, so look at how tall they are. They're like 15 feet tall, solid bronze. You have doors that are made out of silver and pewter and partly with gold here. This is an entrance to a yeshiva institute in the Jewish quarter. And then you have floors. There's my shoe there. It's all muddy right now because it was raining that day. But this is a facsimile of bits and pieces of tile that were found when the Muslims dug that mosque that seats 8,000 people, and I told you they brought in bulldozers. The dirt had to go somewhere. I was there in 1984 and 85 and had to dodge huge trucks that were hauling out, big dump trucks that barely fit through the Lion Gate. They're hauling out all this debris. They dumped it like garbage down in the Kidron Valley. The archaeologists said, you just did us a favor because we don't have to excavate now. And they went down there and they've been sifting through hundreds of tons of dirt from the Temple Mount with stuff dating back not only to the time of David, but even to the time of the Jebusites before. And one woman who is an archaeologist began to find fragments of colored tiles and piece them together, and she found out that the floor of the Temple Mount around the temple was paved like that, but the whole floor, not just a little section. We're talking about thousands and thousands of square feet that were paved just like that. That's what the floor in the temple and the Temple Mount area looked like. It must have been amazing. And then, of course, you have menorahs all over the place. This menorah is on a glass panel in front of the Knesset. That's their Capitol building right there. That's where they have all their meetings. And then you have this huge one right out in front of the Knesset. The Knesset's right back over there. And this one was given by the Brits. It's got stories all over it. It's bronze. And of course, we went there and we were picking out all the different stories that are on that one. Here's a Hanukkah menorah. It has actually 9 branches, the middle one being a pilot light, and this is for Hanukkah at the western wall. You have this menorah here that's out in front of the rebuilt Herva Synagogue in Herva Square in the middle of the Jewish quarter. That particular menorah was built by the Temple Institute. They intend to put that in the third temple. You know, the one in prophecy? And they're not Christians. This is what they built. That's where they intend to put it. That's built for the third temple. If that thing ever goes up, that's the menorah that's going in it. Fulfilled prophecy. The Herva Synagogue during the day. There's the menorah on display there in this big, big town square that they now have. This woman right here, dressed as a biblical character, is talking to all of these Jewish children because this is what they do. They put such a priority on their children and education. They get them all together and they have people educate them any way they can and entertain them at the same time. This is all education. Man, these people, no wonder the Jews are the smartest people in the world because they just don't let up on the learning. As you read the Bible, don't let that happen to you either. You read that thing, you learn it because that's God speaking. Get ears to hear what he says. And here's this woman here. Once again, she's dressed as a Bible character. All of these children are Jewish children, and she's right out there in the middle of the day doing this. And I was sitting out there eating lunch, and then she packed up, and then she came back about a half an hour later, and she's doing it again with another group. They just bring them out as field trips there in the Jewish quarter. And then you have children all over the place. This is in the Cardo. I'll show you that in just a few minutes. And these kids are playing in the shredded stuff. I don't know what it is, but they're burying themselves in it. I took that picture of that guy. I love it there. But this is a bar mitzvah. This kid is now 12 years old. He's headed off towards the western wall where he's going to read the Torah, and all the women who are going to be outside the fences around the men's section. They'll be really close to the women's section. They're going to actually shower him with candy after he reads the Torah properly. And of course, there's a big celebration. There's people playing music. Holly remembers this. It was loud and crazy, and they're carrying this kid. This happens a lot on Thursdays. This is a bridegroom. These are the groomsmen dancing around him in the middle of the night before he goes to get his bride. They still do this. This is a Jewish bridegroom, middle of the night, the men just reveling around this guy before he goes out to get his bride. This is a church of the Holy Sepulchre. Many of you have heard of this place, some of you haven't. Often mispronounced. I saw a guy on Channel 13 News, and he was a brand new newsreader, and unfortunately a terrorist had set up a bomb at the little plaza in front of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he didn't know how to pronounce it, and he said that a bomb went off today in front of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, but this structure right here is perhaps the tomb where Jesus rose from the dead. Perhaps because it's either that or the garden tomb. Which one is it? Flip a coin. But what they did to this thing was horrendous because it used to be a cave. And then the Romans came along, the Byzantines, Helena, Constantine's mother, carved the cave out and turned it into a mausoleum. So she carved the hill all out from around the cave. And then, of course, it's been restored, rebuilt. It was destroyed in 1007 by a mad caliph who came in and took it all the way down to the foundations. And then it was rebuilt by somebody else, by the Crusaders and what have you. And finally, it's got a Baroque motif on it now, and that was just finished being restored. This is a day of holy fire for the Greek Orthodox, and they gather around on a very special day, and they all light torches there. They have good food there, by the way. This is called kanafa, and it's absolutely heavenly stuff. Other churches, this is the Church of Domitian, their Domitian Abbey, which is over by the room that commemorates the Last Supper. This is the church that's built right in the middle of the Garden of Gethsemane, All Nations Church. They will say that underneath here, in this particular area, there's a rock underneath the altar, and they'll say that's where Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. How do they know that? But we do know that it was in the area. It was in the Garden of Gethsemane, so it was somewhere around there, but it doesn't even say he prayed at a rock. He just prayed there. But they commemorate it this way, and it's got all this beautiful motif in there. The acoustics are fantastic. They have Crusader churches. This is the one that survived all the sieges of Jerusalem, and even Saladin preserved that one. This place has the best acoustics of any church in the Holy Land and possibly in the Middle East. It's my favorite place in all Jerusalem, not because it's a church, but because it's built for worship. And there's nothing in there. It's very, very plain on the inside, and you just go in to sing. But it is built over this site here. This is looking down about 60 feet, and you have these stairs right here in this area here. And you can see over here they are again, these stairs. This is parts of the pool of Bethesda. This is where Jesus healed the man who was paralyzed at the pool because he couldn't get in the water when the angel stirred up the water. Those are the steps. So it's all that's exposed to the pools of Bethesda, but it shows you how much was built up over the top over time in history because it's 60 feet underground. That's how far down it goes, and it's right next to that. And you have little hidden places like this. You walk out the back, here's this dirty field with garbage all over it, and you walk up to this, you look inside, and you see that. That used to be a cistern, later turned into a mikveh, and eventually turned into a church, a very, very early church. 1st century. So we're talking about sometime in the vicinity of Pentecost. Down in there, you can't get, I couldn't get inside. I know some people that have been, but I've never successfully been able to do it. Somebody turned it into a place where there's a table here, which indicates that was for masses, so it's Catholic. But in here, this is believed to be one of the sites where the very first church right after Pentecost started to meet. One of the indications was they found several of these type of objects in there with this messianic symbol, a menorah, a Star of David, and a fish right here. And it's Yeshua HaMashiach. And this is where it came from. It's a messianic symbol. They found, I think, 19 of those buried down in that cistern amidst all the debris when they fished it all out. Temple Mount, you got domes, you have color, you have tiles, there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the right-hand side there, again up on the Temple Mount. You have tunnels that run underneath the city of David. I'll show you this one in our final hour that we have here coming up shortly. But this tunnel, I call it the sewer tour, but that tunnel right there is actually one of the most important things in all of Jerusalem, archaeologically speaking. You have graves that you find there. This is in the Christian cemetery. This one, the grave of Horatio G. Spafford. Oh, him. What did he write? It is well with my soul. He wrote, "It is well with my soul." That's the author of that great hymn, and he's buried there in Jerusalem, right inside the gates of the Christian cemetery on Mount Zion. This looks like something out of Narnia. It's just it used to be a street going through here. That used to be part of a street there, and it's all walled off, and now it's a restaurant. Look at that. You'd pass that up, you'd blink and miss it. Look at this right here. This was right outside of the place where I was living when I lived in Jerusalem. Obviously it's a restaurant. There's the bistro tables. This is basically Latin shorthand, but it's legate of X, 10th Roman Legion Fratensis, and so forth. And it's for the 10th Roman Legion, who was the legion that destroyed Jerusalem. This was their commemorative column, and it's put in the name of their legate or legate, who was the man in charge. He was a senator who actually acted as a general and was in charge of the 10th Roman Legion a while after Jerusalem was destroyed. This was set up in a restaurant in the middle of the street, and people think it's concrete. This thing is a Roman legionnaire's monument right there in Jerusalem. Surprising things. You have antiquities. This is in a friend's house. He's an antiquities dealer. Look at this stuff. He's selling all this stuff. He's just getting rid of it. He's the greatest antiquities dealer in all of Israel. Happens to be a close personal friend of our guide. There's Pastor Jim looking at all this stuff. Look, ancient oil lamps, and he on the floor, you're kicking 2,000-year-old coins out of the way like debris in this guy's house. And of course, here he is. He's a Scottish Jew, and he's a very, very interesting guy. Lenny Wolfe, if his signature is on something, it's authentic. He's a really fun guy to be around. You run into rabbis there. You run into people that are going off to prayer on the Sabbath day. These men are going off to prayer on the Sabbath day. You have this one, and we're just about to go to a break, but I wanted to show you this picture. This is a rabbi. He's a very important rabbi. I don't know who he is, but he's very important because he's surrounded by these guys. He's walking very slowly because he's really old, but he's listening to what the people are saying. Those guys gathered around him are his disciples, and he'll take a walk through Jerusalem, and his disciples around him will just pummel him with questions, and he will answer the questions with more questions. And boy, these guys learn. And so this is one of those examples. Again, I was sitting there for lunch, right? That menorah I showed you that's going to be in the temple is just right over here. And I saw this guy coming through, and all these guys are just gesturing him and talking to him and listening to him. This is the way that the Jews teach each other in that part of the world. And of course, modern Jerusalem. This is about 1.5 miles away from the Temple Mount, and you can see this beautiful bridge that holds up their transit system there. It's got an American flag. Here's a wall, and this is the wall over by the Jaffa Gate. They have projectors that will project things up there. They put this up there. This was when Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and I was there when this happened, and everybody went wild, and they projected this up there, and people were just congratulating the Americans for finally doing that. Here's the seal that's on the side of the embassy here. Here's Mark Bunger, my friend from Napa, who helps me run the tours, and here it is, Donald J. Trump, President, Michael Pence, Vice President, dedicated by David Friedman, Ambassador to the State of Israel, and David Friedman has written a great book. If you want to read it, it's very clean, it's very, very good and informative, and it's called Sledgehammer. And this is of course during Trump's first term in office, and David Friedman has written the book, so I can recommend that to you guys. And then this, holy mackerel, Cyrus the Great is alive, and there's Donald Trump. But this was when I was there in October, and I was on a transit bus, and I saw that. I took a picture of it really quick because he was treating Israel so well, and Israel was experiencing all kinds of victories, and the ceasefire had happened, and the hostages let go, and the next thing you know, these posters go up all over town. That's on a skyscraper. So, wow, crazy, isn't it? And this is the last picture before our break. They have a monument there. This monument is a 9/11 monument. It's very hard to get to. I can't take a group there because you can't get a bus there. And even if you have a car, you have a really hard time finding it. But it's a magnificent monument. And this is an American flag, like a flame going up here. Parts of the World Trade Center are in here. This is in Hebrew. This is in English. And all the way around here, bronze plaques with everyone's name who died on 9/11. It's a beautiful sight right there in Jerusalem. This is New Jerusalem back over here. And I just wanted to show you just how they treat us. So next, we're going to dive into the heart of Jerusalem. Take a 5-minute break, please, and then we'll be back and we'll wrap this up. All right, if I could have your attention. Now we're going to go into the heart of Jerusalem, the literal heart of the city. It's called the Cardo. I pointed this out on that Madaba map, remember, with the street that went the full length of the city? Cardo, as in cardiac. It's literally the heart of the city. The Cardo, here it is right here. This is the Cardo of the city. And once again, that way is north. That's the Damascus Gate. This would be the Jaffa Gate. This would be St. Stephen's Gate over here. The Golden Gate would actually be over in this area, but as I said, this became like a garbage dump during that Byzantine times. But this street right here still exists, either above ground or below ground, but it's still there in Jerusalem today. This is part of it. This is the entrance to it in the Jewish quarter. There used to be shops all around in here and over in this area here. These are some of the columns that used to hold up a roof. As you go into it even further, this is more of the Cardo. There are buildings on top. The way that Jerusalem has to do its archaeology, it's got all these huge buildings, schools, shops, homes, so everything's in the basement. So they open up people's basements, as it were, and build buildings above all the ruins. This is part of a street right along here. Once again, these columns held up a roof. There were shops back in these areas here. And then you have this painting that somebody painted right there to kind of give you an idea of what it looked like in those days. So if you were to keep going, this is what the heart of the city in biblical times actually looked like in Jerusalem. And this is kind of a fun little painting because you can get your picture taken in front of it. This is one of the original columns. And here's a kid with a backpack and a skateboard right there. So it was just to kind of bring things a little bit up to date, and a little girl talking with him from a couple thousand years ago. But this is also the Cardo. Just past this point right here, as you go around the corner, you see this, and this arched area here. This is a beautiful place. Shops, it's quiet, it's in the Jewish quarter, but it was built by the Crusaders. So it's relatively new, built between 11 and 1200, the end of 1200 AD. They built this thing, and now it's all these beautiful shops. But what you have are some strange structures right here. Now, I have a friend who is an artist who works out of this building area right over here, and his name is Udi. But these areas right here in the middle, people walk past them, and they don't even give it any heed at all. But as you walk through the Cardo, you see those structures, and you see these lines that are different colors there on the paving stones that are there. You can't really see them well in this picture, but there's one right there going across here, another one back over here, another one back over in here, and another one back over in there. They're marking the walls that are underground that Hezekiah built. Yeah, the Hezekiah from the Bible. The walls are down there. When you look down those shafts, you can see the remnants of this wall. This is Hezekiah's wall. And it's a whole new thing that they put around it today. You don't need to know about that. But this wall used to be 30 feet tall. And it was made out of rubble from people's homes. Hezekiah, when he put up the wall, knew that the Assyrians were coming. Armies don't attack with jets in those days. It takes sometimes years for an army to move across a certain area of geography to finally get to you. So it gives you some time to prepare. So he demolished whole neighborhoods and had them built into this big wide wall they called the Broad Wall, which the Bible says you could race a chariot around on the top of it. You can see why. It's really wide. Again, this is a standard flight of stairs, and the thing would have been way up here in height. But it even goes underground. This is the part that is above ground and the only part of Hezekiah's wall that's above ground. But when you look down those blocks of stone that I showed you that was there in the middle of the street in that Cardo, this is what you see. You have a ladder going down. This is a concrete structure that's new to hold it all up, but this is Hezekiah's wall, and it goes down 30 feet right there. And people just bypass this, like, who cares about this thing? It's in the way. You're blocking our group. Look down the glass, and suddenly you're looking back into history, 2,600 years. The Israel Museum, they have a fantastic museum in Jerusalem. When I go there to teach, they usually have me take a group of kids down there and we go visit this place. But when you go into the museum, they have it sort of in order of, you know, the oldest to the newest things in there as you walk through each room. And I'll just give you a quick sample. This was found at a place called Beersheba. I'll show you that as we're just about to finish up tonight when we step outside of Jerusalem. But Beersheba is where Abraham lived, Isaac lived. In Beersheba, Abraham dug wells in Beersheba. Beersheba means the city of the 7 wells. This was an altar. These are the horns of the altar. You've heard about the horns of the altar, right? What's it look like? It looks like that. They would use it to tie animals to the altar before they sacrificed the animals, or if you got in big trouble, you would come up and grab hold of the horn of the altar and say, I want justice, I want mercy, and hear my case. And if they felt it was worthy, they wouldn't kill you, and they'd take you out and put you on trial. If they thought you were really a bad person and they already knew it, like they did with a fellow named Joab in the Bible, they just cut him down right there. But those are the horns of the altar. That's a sacrificial altar found at Beersheba. They found this in that sewer that I showed you about, the sewer tour. It's a drainage tunnel. That is a bell, a gold bell. I'm sorry, it's not a clear picture. That was from the hem of the high priest's robe. When he would go into the Holy of Holies and do what he did, he had bells all the way along the bottom of his robe that would just jingle a little bit. And if somebody heard a chink happen in there, they had a rope tied to his leg. They would just drag out a dead body. Because you don't do anything wrong or sacrilegious when you're in there, or God would kill you. So they had these bells. They found this in the sewer, which tells you during the siege of Jerusalem, somebody was either above the sewer and it fell off the robe, or somebody was trying to smuggle it out, the priest's robe, through the sewer, because the high priest's robe was a very sacred object to everybody there. And a bell fell off. Somebody found it while they were excavating the sewer, and now it's in the Israel Museum. This is in the Israel Museum. It doesn't look like much. It's a little scroll. When you roll it up, it's only this wide. It's only that long unrolled. It's a very tiny thing. But this is the Aaronic blessing that says, of course, the Lord bless thee and keep thee, make his face to shine upon thee, and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. This is what it says in Hebrew. It's done in Paleo-Hebrew. This thing is 450 years to 500 years older than the oldest Dead Sea Scroll. This is the oldest written scripture that's ever been found, right there. older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's equally as important as any Dead Sea Scroll. It was found in a tomb over by the Scottish mission outside the walls of Jerusalem. Anybody read that? No, of course not. Paleo-Hebrew, remember in Isaiah chapter 6, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and so forth and so on. That is King Uzziah's signature right there. That's a stone that commemorates him. It says King Uzziah on it in Paleo-Hebrew. Yes, that old. And then this one I mentioned last night. This is the Tel Dan Stele. And there they anointed David king. I don't know why they put that up there. But right here, they put a little chalk right in there where, again, Paleo-Hebrew does not look anything like Hebrew today, but it evolved into what Hebrew is today. But right here, it says the words, House of David. It's in a curse. Somebody didn't like David. They were cursing David's descendants and David's armies. So it says a curse on the house of David, but it's the house of David, which indicates within 100 to 150 years of the time of David, people were recognizing David and his descendants, which means he was not a myth. He was not a legend. He was a real, honest-to-goodness person in history. The Bible, once again, was right. This is the Tel Dan Stele here. And then you have these things in the Herodian room, or the Second Temple period room in the museum. These are stone jars. Now, the reason they're stone is kosher. It doesn't get contaminated in their minds. It doesn't, in other words, it can't be defiled. Pottery can. So if you use pottery for any sacred purpose, you would smash it afterwards. But stone you could reuse because it was considered kosher. These are ceremonial hand-washing pots. John chapter 2, and you have Jesus at the wedding at Cana, which we talked about yesterday. There were 6 water pots there. He said, fill them with water, and of course they ladled it out. Water turned to wine. These are what the pots look like. These aren't the same pots. This is what they look like. Look at how large these things are. I'm standing above them looking down, but they hold 6 or 7, 8, 10 gallons each. When Jesus told the guys, go fill it up, you saw the topography yesterday of Kirbet Cana. They had to go down the hill to a spring somewhere to get living water because you don't use cistern water in a ceremonial cleansing pot. It's got to be clean, pure water. So it probably took half a day for these guys to fill that up before Jesus changed water into wine. Keep in mind, things didn't happen fast in those days. Things happened very slowly in those days. That was just life. It was life for us in very slow motion. But these are the water cleansing pots. How about this? A sarcophagus. Sarcophagus that was put back together again. Only parts of it still exist. Here, over here, and over here in this corner here. The rest of it has all been recreated to be able to fit the fragments that they found of King Herod the Great's sarcophagus, which they found on the side of one of his fortresses called Herodian, which is over by Bethlehem, and we're not going to show you that today. But this is what King Herod the Great was buried in. Why was it all smashed up? Apparently some people went in there after he died and just busted the thing all to pieces because they hated him. He was a tyrant. He was a really mean guy. And he was really crazy at the end of his life. That's his sarcophagus. How about this sarcophagus here? This one's really interesting. Very ornate, isn't it? It's not a sarcophagus. It's called an ossuary. It's only about this big. It's a bone box. It's slightly larger than your femur. It can hold a pelvis, a skull, and the rest of the bones in your body. This one is very ornate because they found the name on the side over here where it says Caiaphas, the man who, again, the high priest who helped condemn Jesus to death and railroaded him to the cross. This is Caiaphas's ossuary. This thing right here, that's the original. They found that at Caesarea. Let me go back to it there. That says up in here, Tiberius over here, and right in this area here, Pilatos. It's called the Pontius Pilate stone. When they were restoring that theater that I showed you in Caesarea yesterday, see how all these things tie together? When they were restoring the theater, they had peeled back one of the seats, and they found this on the bottom of it. It was a secondary construction stone. It was used as a commemorative stone that Pontius Pilate was honoring Tiberius Caesar and put his name on it, and then later on somebody used it as part of a seat in that theater. When they started taking it apart to rebuild it, they found that. Up until that point, a lot of people didn't even believe Pilate was a real person. And then they found that. And oh my, Pilate was real. Something else there. I'm not going to go into details on this, but this is the Holy of Holies of a high place. Remember that the Lord had told no high places to the Israelites, told the kings, tear down the high places. Hezekiah finally did. This is one that he told them to tear down, and the people wouldn't tear it down. The priests that owned this one, they said, hey, we're worshiping Yahweh anyway, so they buried it. They found it in a place called Tel Arad, down by Masada. It was dug up completely intact. This is what an ancient pagan high place looked like. Not very big, roughly the size of an area of one of those obsolete, extinct things called a phone booth. It's not very large. And then you have the model city of Jerusalem. This is my favorite illustration, Bible teaching tool in the world right here. It's a huge thing. It's about 1/3 of an acre in size. It's a 1/24th scale of ancient Jerusalem just before it was destroyed. So in other words, about 40 years after Jesus died and rose again, this is what Jerusalem looked like. If you were to take out this wall right here, all the way around, and leave this wall right here and all of that, that's what it looked like when Jesus was walking the earth. This is the Temple Mount. Look at how high this is here by perspective. And again, this building, to give you a sense of it, 160 feet tall. So from here to here, estimated to be 270 vertical feet from the top here down to here. That's the pinnacle of the temple. This is called Solomon's colonnade. When Jesus overturned the tables, it was underneath this colonnade right in this area here. When he overturned the tables, made a whip, chased everybody out. This is the city of David down here. This is the southern temple steps over here that I told you about with the gates that led up by tunnels that would have come out here and here. This is Herod's palace up in this area here. And this is the Antonia fortress here. It's just an amazing thing to be able to walk around it. Again, a close-up of the temple as you can see it there. Here's the court of the women, where Jesus would go in there, and this is where he saw the widow putting in the widow's mites. There's also the court of the lepers in there, believe it or not. This is the beautiful gate right here. So when Peter and John were going in there and healed that man, he was somewhere outside this gate begging. And when they were going into this area here into the temple courts, of course, only the priests could go into this area, and only the specialized priests would be able to go in there, including the high priest. But that building was plated all over the face with gold. The sun came up over your shoulders, so in the morning, when it shined on that, Josephus tells us you couldn't even look at it because it would blind you, because it was plated with 160 feet high plates of gold, which is, again, when it caught on fire and it melted down, it was destroyed. All of that gold had to go somewhere, which is why they tore the whole thing down. And look at it, it's built like a fort because Herod was paranoid. So I'm going to rebuild the temple, and it will be well, you use a modern term, it'll be my Alamo if we're ever attacked. So he had built it like this crazy fortress right here. So you go around a little bit further, here's the city of David. You could see it here. But in the days of Jesus, they had put huge mansions there. In fact, they're excavating this one right here today. It's been going on since the year 2000, but it's an excavation of a Queen Helena, not Constantine's mother, Helena, that's a different person, but a Queen Helena who was a Parthian or Persian queen. And she built this huge mansion right there, and they started digging it. And they found all of these Jewish artifacts because she was a convert to Judaism. And then they went down a little further, and they found stuff from the Maccabean period and the Maccabean revolt. And then they went down even further, and they found stuff from Hezekiah's time. They found Hezekiah's personal seal to mark documents with. They found a seal that has Isaiah's name on it. They found a seal that had Isaiah's secretary's name on it. I mean, they're finding all of this in just this one little area right here. Imagine if they took all of that apart, which they're in the process of doing right now. Shrine of the Book. This is also there in the Israel Museum. This is the top of it, but if you go underneath it, it looks like that. And this contains not the original. If you ever go there, it's not the original. It's a facsimile of the great Isaiah scroll, the one that they found, a scroll that was nearly completely intact of the book of Isaiah, where you compare it to the modern book, which this is, again, look at it here, stitched together on lambskin and all scribed so beautifully. These people, the Essenes, that sect of the Jews that was very reclusive, who scribed this thing, did such a beautiful job with it. This was the oldest version of the Old Testament that actually existed before they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, as I talked about yesterday. This was dated to 1200 AD, because when the scrolls got old, they destroyed them because they didn't want mistakes to be transferred from one scroll to another, because they'd break down over time. When they got old, they destroyed them or buried them. Buried them like they bury a person, so they would break down. This was the oldest Old Testament, the Aleppo Codex. Look at the wet thumbing that they did to the pages on this particular thing. And then they found that, and it dated back actually 1,400 years earlier, and it said the exact same thing. This is a game changer. This is how we know, unlike the people like the Mormons will come along, sorry, I got to say it, they'll say the Bible has been changed over the years. No, it hasn't. You compare this with this, and they are the same. You compare this with what you have in your lap right now, and it's the same. The Bible has not been changed over the years. It's been proven by archaeological evidence, never mind opinions that has nothing to do with it. Use the science. Yad Vashem, another thing in Jerusalem. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust memorial that's there. I wanted to show you this because this is on the outskirts of the new city, built in a place called Mount Herzl, which is about a 5-mile light rail drive from the old city of Jerusalem. But this, believe it or not, this blade, this concrete blade that literally cuts through a mountainside, is a museum that explains the Holocaust. It's not gory, but it takes a few hours to go through it because it weaves through rooms on the other side of these concrete walls back and forth. And it's meant to make you claustrophobic when you go in there, because they want you to feel like you're going into something that is really, really eerie. They don't want to freak you out, but they want to let you know that this was a real thing and it was horrible. So as you go through, one of the things they have is this area here with the rails and the road. They pulled this out of the Warsaw Ghetto. This is the original floor. This is the original street from the Warsaw Ghetto, which of course was one of the ghettos that was liquidated. The Poles and the Polish Jews, at the beginning of World War II, there were 3.5 million Polish Jews. At the end of World War II, the Polish Jews, there were about 140,000 Polish Jews living outside the country, and in Poland, there were only 3,000 left. That's what the Holocaust did to them. These glasses here that were broken were owned by a guy named Janusz Korczak. That's this man here, who was actually during the Holocaust in the Warsaw Ghetto taking care of a whole school full of children that were Jews. He was not Jewish, but he was taking care of the Jewish kids. When the Gestapo came to collect them and put them on trains, he got on the trains with them and walked them all the way in to the death camp. That made him one of the great heroes of the Holocaust. That's why Yad Vashem, it's a passage from, actually a phrase that comes from Jeremiah, but it means a place and a name. And you've got Janusz Korczak. It's like, there's his name, don't forget it. Because he's the kind of guy that actually shows people what humanity in its humane sense is all about in the face of some of the most terrible things in the world. This is in Yad Vashem. Schindler's List. There it is. Every time I go in there, I have to tell the students that I take in there, you're going to come to a display in the middle of the road. Make sure that you stop and look at it. And every time they walk right past it, because who wants to look at a thing full of a bunch of typed up names? Back up. It's Schindler's List. There it is, right there in the middle of Yad Vashem. This is where it starts getting real as you're going through. It really doesn't get weirder than this, but this is a very, very interesting place because you're walking by and suddenly you look down to your right. Shoes. But they're originals. They're not like somebody just said, let's put this out there on display. They actually collected these and they put them there. So it starts getting very real when you're going through about the Holocaust. You come out the end, there's these glass doors and you have this beautiful platform where you can see the forests surrounding Jerusalem and some of the new parts of the cities that's been built out there. It's just a breath of fresh air, and they want you to know that you've gone into the Holocaust and then you've come out and there's life. And the life is here in God's land, God's people. This is his promise. And even through the Holocaust, they ended up home. So that's why they have this blade. This is the other end of the blade as you're going through. They have the Children's Memorial. 1.3 million kids were murdered in the Holocaust. You walk in, and you have a galaxy of little flickering flames from 4 candles. The room is built with mirrors, so when you walk in, it makes a vast universe of flames coming from a total of 4 candles. And while you're in there, you're hearing the names of children being read by a man and a woman in English and then in Hebrew. And as they repeat the names, every name is different. Every name is one of the children that they know of that were murdered in the Holocaust. And one of the students that was with me, one of the young people that was with us on the trip, had done a calculation because he loved math. And he was listening to the names and he started timing the names being read. And he said, at this rate, reading those names day and night, 24 hours a day, which is what's happening in that room, it will take over 25 years to read all the names. So this is the Children's Memorial. This is outside as you're about ready to leave. They have trees that are planted in the name of righteous Gentiles. Not Jews, but the people that actually did things to help save the Jews during the Holocaust. This tree is dedicated to Irina Sendler. Some of you have heard of her. And she saved all kinds of Jewish children during the Holocaust. They have another one that's on the other side of Yad Vashem to Corrie ten Boom, another one to Oskar Schindler, another one to Raoul Wallenberg. They're all considered the avenue of the righteous, and they plant trees in their name, and they put a little placard down there, and right there it says Irina Sendler, right there. And oh, by the way, it says it in Hebrew, English, and Arabic. Everywhere you go in Israel, all the signs are in 3 different languages, not 2. Arabic is the 3rd language on every street sign in Israel. This is inside the Hall of Names. You could blink and miss this as you're walking by to exit the building. But this is the most important room in the entire memorial there in Israel, having to do with the Holocaust. And again, the Holocaust helping to bring about modern Israel because the people needed a place to go. And even after World War II, nobody wanted to take the Jews in. So they all began to go over to Israel. And at that time known as the territory of Palestine. This room here has a pit that goes down into dark water, and it has this, which is almost like a chimney. And all of these are pictures and passports and family portraits that go all the way up into the ceiling to give an idea of the people that had died in the Holocaust. It's very moving. It's not something that's gross and gory, and you don't usually break down in tears. But the thing that gets to me is all of these open shelves here versus these which are not open. They're all full of books, but these are all open here. And this is looking up inside of that chimney-like structure. These are all people who perished in the Holocaust. But these books here are a catalog of the names of all the people that they know that had died in the Holocaust. The empty shelves are there for all the names they don't yet know, but fully expect someday to fill up all of those shelves. There's millions of them. So this is Yad Vashem, a very, very important part of Jerusalem. You see, it's not rocks, it's not ancient, but it's a catastrophe, and yet as you're exiting Yad Vashem, they have that verse that I actually read yesterday about that how the Lord will bring you back to life, bring you into your own country. I have done it, says the Lord, is over the exit arch of Yad Vashem, saying, God brought us home even through all of this. It's quite a remarkable thing. So this is where the name comes from. To them, I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name, or a place and a name, Yad Vashem. Better than sons and daughters, I will give them an everlasting name that will not be cut off. Isaiah 56:5. The city of David. City of David, as I mentioned before, is the city that David conquered. That's why it's called the city of David. Remember, I said it was called Shalom, which is where, again, Abraham met Melchizedek. After that, it was changed to Jebus in name of the tribe, the Jebusites, which of course was a pagan tribe that owned the city, and then David conquered it, and he called it Jerusalem. This was the city of David about 50 years ago. That's all it looked like. All the ruins are underneath here of David's city. Up here, a parking lot. Up here, a field, the South Temple steps. You can't even see them. They haven't been excavated yet. Helena's mansion that they're excavating is in this area right here. And it's a massive excavation. Again, it continues to go. Kathy and I, and where is Kathy? There she is back there. She and I ended up there by mistake. We were coming through part of the city of David through a tunnel, an exit tunnel. We came out. Here's this huge dig. We knew it was there, but it was open. So we walked down there, and I think one of the archaeologists came up and said, "What are you doing here?" "Well, it was open. Get out." So anyway, they didn't want tourists in there, but we had walked into it. But that's the city of David. Today, this is the city of David. Now we're on a high vantage point looking south. Here's the Kidron Valley. Here's Silwan with all those tombs of ancient kings underneath there, Israelite kings, by the way, that are underneath all of these houses. This valley, once again, run to the horse's bridle with blood someday, but it eventually flows out all the way down to the Dead Sea. The city of David is this ridge here. Here's the retaining wall. It's kind of obscured by this olive tree right here, but I showed you the retaining wall earlier. Here are some structures that date back to the time of David here. This is David, got to remember, he conquered Jerusalem in about 1000 BC. So that puts David back about 3026 years ago when he actually conquered Jerusalem. So that's how old this city is that we're dealing with right here because of David, but it goes back even a couple of thousand years earlier than that when it was inhabited. Here's more of it looking from that wall, that platform, that retaining wall I showed you, looking down, the stair steps of the retaining wall. Here's a group of people down here, and they're being taught by a guide or a professor or somebody. Here's Silwan. Here's the Kidron Valley behind it. Where this picture is taken right here, so I'm looking this way, I do an about face, and you're looking underground and you're seeing all of this. Eilat Mazar excavated all of this, but she used to have a little shed that was on top of it before she removed the dirt. And she was working on a project, and you can read all about it in books on the city of David, where somebody had stepped into her office and said, "So what are you digging next?" She says, "Right underneath your feet." "So what are you looking for?" "King David's palace." That's King David's palace. That's all that's left of it. But he would have walked on those stones because they actually carved it out, flattened out the bedrock here. Who knows what these things were for? Here's some of the structure here, lots of structure over there, lots of structure back there. Who knows what all of that's for? I don't. Somebody does. But this is the remnants of King David's palace right here. Here's another view of it. What's above it? The ticket booth to go into the city of David. You're sitting there buying tickets, you look down through the floorboards and you can see something down there. There's a flight of stairs behind you. You go down the flight of stairs. Here's King David's palace. And it's real. This is not Disneyland. This is the real thing. Here's David's palace right here. And then, of course, if you want to go a little further, you've got to go underground because today, if you didn't notice, there's a neighborhood on top of the city of David. That picture that I showed you from about 50 years ago, they have since built it all up. Man, there are houses everywhere and few streets and roads and sidewalks all through that area. But you've got to go underneath. Otherwise, you collapse the houses and you create an international incident. That area is so sensitive because on top of that city of David, most of the homes are owned by Palestinians who live there and have lived there ever since they built the houses, and some of the houses, again, are quite old. And they will try and stop the dig because every time they dig something out in this area, it says Israel was here first. Not only first, but for a really long time. Not 50 years, not 80 years, 3,000 years at least, and that just goes back to David. That doesn't even go back before him to the time of Judges. I mean, wow, this place is really, really old. So they have to be very careful to shore up what they're digging so that the houses don't budge, crack, move, pipes don't break, cracks don't appear in the walls. They're very, very particular. This particular tunnel right here was dug out of the bedrock, probably by the Jebusites way back before the time of David. You have to walk through this to get down there. That's Holly right there, by the way. Once you get down a little further, and I mean you're constantly descending, they even have metal stairs that you have to go down, you come into this area right here. This is actually part of an old gate. You really can't tell because it's so old, it's just kind of busted up really bad. But this particular area here was a gate that went down to the Gihon Spring. This is called David's Gate because up in here, that's the entrance to the gate. That was built in David's time. So King David would have come in and out of that gate. Notice it's all underground. At the time of David, it would have been all above ground right there. And this would go down to the spring where people would be able to go down in a protected area with heavy fortified walls around it, because you've got to protect your water source. And there they had a big pool that the Gihon spring spilled out into, and they could get their water and haul it back up into the city. This is how things worked in those days. Life was very hard. And of course, looking down, they put colored lights on this, so it didn't work out so well. But this is the pool where the water would have been. In the time of Jeremiah, when the Babylonians were attacking Jerusalem and they were laying siege to it, Jeremiah, who was prophesying against the Judeans, because they had gotten back into Israel, they dropped him into a cistern, and there he's in the miry mud, or in the pit. You've read about that. Even songs have been written about it. But this is believed to be where they dropped Jeremiah, because by then this area had been abandoned. They had actually moved the water source from here to another side of the city, which I'll explain in a minute, because it's really cool what happened. But this area was abandoned. Now it's just a cistern that's full of mud, and they think they dropped him into this one. So this is probably Jeremiah's cistern right here. And of course, here's the gang here. There's Jim and Deanne there, and a few other people from our trip as they're standing just above this area. Give you a little bit of a perspective. But oh, by the way, they're dressed funny for a reason, because they're going to be going through this right here. Where they are, this is the city of David right here. That's Solomon's temple, not Herod's temple, but that's the Temple Mount. But Hezekiah, when he knew that the Assyrians were coming, didn't just tear down neighborhoods and build a wall, as I already showed you. He rerouted the Gihon Spring, which I told you, remember that name, it's very important, which was located right here, and he wanted to move it over here. So he arranged to dig a tunnel. He did it in 8 months. It's an astonishing feat of engineering, where he sent a crew here to dig a tunnel underneath the city of David. This is 90 meters of rock right here. It's bedrock. They dug in this way, and then they began to serpentine in this direction. Meanwhile, there's another crew coming this direction, and they're serpentining this way. And finally, they get to right about there, and they start hearing each other chiseling, and they hear voices. And when they met, they were only 1 foot off in elevation from each other when they met in the middle. Why is it going back and forth like that? Because if you've got tunnels digging this way, you could miss each other. But if you're doing this, you're eventually going to connect. And he managed to dig this thing in 8 months, 577 yards long. That's almost 6 football fields in length, under 90 meters of rock, in order to move the water source from a vulnerable area here to the base of the city down here, but a much more secure place. This eventually pours into a reservoir here, which is expanded by King Herod the Great into something that we know as the Pool of Siloam. That's where the blind man, when Jesus spit, put mud in the guy's eyes, said, go down to the Siloam pool and wash your eyes out. You'll see again. This is a man born blind, by the way, so that made the miracle even that much more astonishing, because other people in the Bible that Jesus healed may not have been born blind, but this man was born that way, and everybody knew it. So this made it a gigantic miracle, a man who had never seen anything in his life, and he washed his eyes out down here. But you got to get the water there, and so it goes through this. As you're going through it, that's what it looks like. And as I go through it myself, I have to go through it like this. So you got to kind of go sort of blade your body, and one hand on one wall and one on the other, and you're walking through water that before they actually began to regulate the water going through, used to come up to about my knees. So you're slogging really, it's quite an ordeal getting through. Now it comes up to about your ankle, except in one place where it's extra deep and it comes up to about your hip, and then it shallows again and you walk through. Most of the time, it's about maybe 5.5 to 6 feet up. But I've learned now the hard way, I have actually a plastic helmet liner that goes inside my ball cap, because at some point this thing gets down to less than 5 feet in height. And every time I put my head up to look, that little button on the top of your cap just slams into your skull, because you're banging it on bedrock over your head. And you're walking through like this and slogging through water, and there are no lights in there. No electricity, you've got to bring your own lights. That it's red there, and once again, that's Holly's headlamp, because I've never seen anybody go through with a red lamp before, but she brought a red headlamp with her, and it made it look really pretty when I took the pictures because it's all red. But that's the inside of Hezekiah's tunnel. You can even see here, and here it's really smooth. That's the plaster that Hezekiah's men actually put on the walls to seal up the leaks so it wouldn't leak, so they could move this tunnel before the Assyrians got there. Once again, Holly was really handy being behind me there. This area that's all chiseled out right there, back when the tunnel was rediscovered, a young boy who had discovered something in there was writing on the wall, he said. And the Turks went in and they saw it, and they sent in some Turkish archaeologists who chiseled the thing out because it was a dedication inscription just near the exit of the tunnel that explains how these people had dug the tunnel, and then how they heard each other, how they met in the middle and they congratulated each other when they finally broke through. It was a dedication plaque that's known as the Shalom inscription, and it looks like that. Today, it's in the Archaeological Museum of Istanbul, where I took this picture, but the Turks have it. And before October 7th, Israel was in negotiations in order to get it back and bring it back to Israel. And then, of course, October 7 happened, and Gaza happened, and the Turks took issue with it. Not the Turks in particular, but Erdogan, the leader, who is not a good leader. He's a very smart man, but he's a very dangerous one. And the negotiations broke down. This remains in Istanbul, but there it is. And once again, written in Paleo-Hebrew all the way back to the time of Hezekiah. That explains how the tunnel was made right there. That's why they know the details. And it's mentioned twice in the Bible as the waterworks that Hezekiah put in. By the way, one more thing. That tunnel and that wall were completely unnecessary. The Lord said, I'm going to deliver you from this if you do what I say. They did what he said. But Hezekiah also said, but just in case God doesn't come through, I'm going to build this wall and dig this tunnel. It was plan B. How many of us do plan B when God promises us plan A? Ooh, did I really have to say that in the middle of a fun time like this? Yeah, because that was what Hezekiah did. God didn't fault him on it. He just didn't need it. It was completely unnecessary, because that's the time, once again, when the Assyrians finally showed up. God killed 185,000 of them in a single night, and they all went home afterwards. This is at the Pool of Siloam. When you come out of that tunnel, you're coming out over in this area here. These steps were recently excavated. This was all, when I first started going through Hezekiah's tunnel, all of this was underground. You didn't even know it was there except by the biblical description. But the stairs are massive. Look at this. Here's a group up here. Here's the exit out of the tunnel up here, and it also an entrance to a secondary tunnel. And this is the dig that they're doing. Recently, the steps only came to about here, and then there was dirt and there was a wall right here, just a dirt wall. Back in here, it was a melon field that was owned by the Greek Orthodox Church. But finally, after all these years, they decided to sell it to Israel, because Israel knew that behind it there was the remnants of this huge reservoir. This entire area is just part of a lake, part of a reservoir that was built originally by Hezekiah and then expanded and improved by Herod the Great. It was a mikveh where people would ceremonially cleanse themselves, and they could get pure living water because the water flowed in, the water flowed out. It was considered very pure and sacred water, and they could go there. But you see all of this dirt here, it came from up there, ended up here. What do you think is in all that stuff? Who knows what kind of artifacts they're cleaning right now that has ended up in that reservoir, just that sump that's collected the artifacts of 3,000 years in that thing, or actually 2,600 years. Unbelievable what they're going to start announcing someday with this. And here's what the dig looks like looking down into it. Before, that was just a melon field, and now it's this huge, huge reservoir. And there's even a dam at that end over there that actually held the water in. This is where it is. City of David here, and the tunnel, it's way down here, and it loops through here, and it comes out and empties into that pool right there. This is part of the model city. There's the south part of the Temple Mount right there. But here's the deal. I said this was a mikveh. I'm not wasting your time by telling you anything that I'm saying. If you're paying attention, catch this. A mikveh was done for ceremonial cleansing, so that you would be ceremonially cleansed in order to do a sacrifice or make a sacred vow before the Lord if you were a Jew. And you would go down to the Shalom pool to do it because it's big, and you would have thousands and thousands of people wanting to do this every single day. So it's a great big pool where you can go in and dip. You wouldn't do it naked down there, by the way. Those are for private ones, but you would do it in your clothes. And it's like a self-baptism. And then you would go back up here to the Temple Mount. You would either go through these gates here, or you would go through a huge arch up there where there were stairs that led up, where I told you that thing collapsed and broke the street. Well, this road right here is called the Pilgrim's Road. It's a name that has been applied by the archaeologists because it's wide and it's basically a straight shot. It doesn't wind through all the houses and the villages on the way up. It goes straight up, a big, broad road made out of limestone, because that way you didn't bump into anybody that was unclean. You didn't touch anything that was unclean. It kept you in a ceremonially cleansed state, coming from the mikveh, where you cleansed yourself, to get up to the temple, where you're going to do sacred acts. Again, a sacrifice, get married, make a vow, end a vow, whatever you're going to do. So they have this incredibly important road that was there. The road has been hidden for a very long time. And the critics of Israel's existence, saying that none of this ever existed and they never had anything like this, has now been destroyed, because they've been able to connect the Siloam pool and the city of David to the Temple Mount by that road. Suddenly, the city of David is no longer Palestinian. It's ancient Israelite. That's why the city of David is so important, because it keeps on affirming that the Israelis, or the Israelites, have been there historically for 3,000 years. The city of David is absolutely vital to verifying, even though there's no doubt in my mind, but for the rest of the world, verifying Israel's ancient existence and its right to the land. That's why this dig is one of the most, if not the most important archaeological dig going on in the world today. This is that sewer tour that I told you about. This is a drainage that was put in by Herod that goes right underneath that Pilgrim's Road. So it's like the piping or the sewer that's underneath. The reason that's important, before they could excavate the road, and the excavation for the road was put to a stop for 20 years. They couldn't do anything with it. But they opened up the drainage tunnel, and nobody seemed to mind that somebody opened up that thing. Well, that made the connection underneath the road. That's the Pilgrim's Road right overhead, and this goes all the way to the Temple Mount. In fact, it exits just by that big pile of rocks that I showed you that were thrown off the Temple Mount and that they excavated and left in place. Here's what the Pilgrim Road looks like today. This is at the very entrance to it. These areas where the blocks are moved out of the way, Josephus wrote about this. In the siege of Jerusalem, the Jews would try and get out through the drainage tunnels and a sewer that, he said, ran underneath the Pilgrim's Road. That's that excavation that I just showed you, the sewer tour that I called it. But it also came out through here. And in here, they found bits and pieces of pottery and things that people would have carried with them. Josephus describes that the Romans heard them in the sewers, peeled up parts of the road, pulled out the Jews, and slaughtered them on the spot. They actually left the rocks laying out, and they got buried in the siege of Jerusalem and were recently excavated. And what they did when they found the rocks, they realized they were reading history right out of Josephus, the historian's book, about what happened, which Jesus prophesied was going to happen. And they left the rocks in place and showed you where they found the pottery and what have you there. This is history that unfolded right there in the first century. And then this is what it looks like now today. This just opened up. I have not been through it yet because it opened up in February. But it goes like this, for not 577 yards like Hezekiah's tunnel does. This goes for over 800 yards, and this used to be above ground, and it was a lot wider. It was 2 or 3 times as wide as this, and ended up right at the foot of the Temple Mount on that road that I showed you that had the big rocks that were tumbled down on top of it, the road where the pavement was broken because I told you about the big arch that fell on it. It ended right, that's this road. It ends right there at the foot of the Temple Mount so that the Jews can get up there after cleansing themselves. The connection has been made. That's how it works. And here's more of it. Once again, all of this supports a neighborhood overhead, but it just keeps going and going uphill. And then it ends up right here. Here's a facsimile of that arch. This is, of course, a computer-generated thing. And that way would be the Wailing Wall, would be over in this area here against this wall. All of this has been destroyed now, but that's the Pilgrim's Road there, and here it is today, right there. That's where the arch fell. That's the exit, right there. So this is Jerusalem in its most ancient state, and it's underground. And part of it, when you're going through this tunnel, is the corner over here, the cornerstone of the Temple Mount itself. You can actually touch it. It's right there at bedrock meets stone, where they piled it up and stacked it up there for the Temple Mount when they started building it, is right down in this area here. Again, there's the giant rocks that they threw down. This is Pastor Jim here. These are the last two pictures of Jerusalem. I'm going to show you a couple more things and then we wrap up. But this is also at the city of David. It's at the far southeastern corner of the city of David. These are tombs. The tombs used to be completely covered up. That was the entrance, not this. This was solid rock, and this was solid rock, and this entrance went this way, and there was another one over here that's gone now that went into there. But the Romans used it as a rock quarry, which is why it was opened up. They just started hammering rocks out. They didn't care what those were. But they dug this up. Again, it was covered with dirt. Archaeologists working uncovered this. And what they discovered were two monumental royal tombs. One here and one here. This one on the left, there's a platform there where the body would have been, and who knows what would have been here. And once again, all this would have been covered up. It would have been just part of the mountainside. King David's tomb. Every once in a while you hear about King David's tomb being on Mount Zion. It's not. That's called a cenotaph up there. That's the word for it. It's a commemorative tomb. And there's a sarcophagus in there and everything, but the person who's in it is probably a crusader or an Arab sheik or something like that, because it wasn't David. David said, the Bible says he was buried in the city of David, and that is believed to be King David's tomb, believed by archaeologists. They cannot prove it because his name isn't on it. If it was removed by the Romans because they were just quarrying out stone that they wanted to build something with. But either way, that's the biggest monumental tomb in the city of David. They think that's where David was buried, right there. Last couple of things, few things. The Elah Valley. This is outside of Jerusalem, outside of Bethlehem, a few miles. This is a valley where David fought Goliath. This stack of stones here, recently uncovered city. This is a Davidic gate here. You can see the compartments on the side. This is before Solomon, who was David's son. Israelite armies would have been up in here. Philistine armies up here, here, and off to the right. And somewhere in here, David would have gone out to fight Goliath. These steps that are carved right here, I put my shadow there and pointing to the steps. They're 3,000 years old or more. David would have walked on that ground. Like I said, let the stones speak. There it is. Beersheba, I told you about that, city of the seven wells. This is where Abraham lived for a while. Isaac lived for a while. And these are the ruins of the city here. As there's a facsimile of the altar that I showed you already. I showed you the original one. This was one that was put back into Beersheba just so that people knew what, they got it here and this is what it kind of looked like. You want to cling to the horns of the altar? There you go. Don't kill me. I'm innocent. I'm hanging onto the horns of the altar. Put me on trial and find justice. And Abraham also built wells there. I'm going to pass that up, but here's a well that has been improved upon, but it's a very ancient well and it's a very deep well. And this is believed to be the well that Abraham dug actually inside the city of Beersheba. This is also the well where the Camp David Accord was finalized. You guys remember that, don't you? With Jimmy Carter. I kept wanting to think Bill Clinton. But Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. They signed a paper in the White House, but they came to Beersheba because Abraham is the father not only of the Jews, but of the Arabs. And he's considered also the patriarch of the Muslims, for that matter. And they met over a platform that was built over the top of this well, their common ancestor, and there Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat broke bread. That finalizes everything because it makes two people family, which is why Israel and Egypt haven't been fighting with each other, because technically they're now cousins because of what those two men did at this well. This ratified the peace process. This is looking down in the well, not much to see. People drop some rocks there, big deal. Samaria and Judea, Shiloh, this area right here. This is where the tabernacle once stood at Shiloh. Probably stood at all 3 or 4 other locations because they can move it around. It was a tent. They would move it as a portable temple. But this is a place where the tabernacle once stood. The Holy of Holies would have been in this area right here. I'll pass this picture right here. Here's a group of people meeting near the Holy of Holies in Shiloh. When we bring them in there and stand them there, I don't tell them where they are, because if I said Shiloh to you, a lot of you would go, I've heard the name. There's a church named that somewhere, I think, near Gettysburg or something. But Shiloh was the location where the tabernacle stood, and this is one of the places where the actual tabernacle tent enclosure stood. If this is the right one from the right era, and we have no way of knowing that, at this end was the entrance, and this is where Hannah would have come and been met by Eli because she was praying for a son, and later on became pregnant, gave birth to Samuel, who would have ministered in this thing here. So that's Shiloh. I'm going to have to, again, keep going. Beit El. This is Bethel, the original Bethel. Not much to it, but what you're looking at here is a site that's a whole bunch of threshing floors. It's a high place there next to the village of Bethel, and this is the area somewhere around here where Jacob would have laid his head on a rock and saw this vision, this dream that he had of this stairway, literally a stairway to heaven. No homage to the song, believe me. It was more like a stairway than it was a ladder, with God at the top and angels ascending and descending on it. And I mean, you just lay there on a rock and you can see it yourself. So, but this is the area where it happened. This is the area where Israel was born. I'm sorry I can't go into all these details, but there in Genesis I will mention here that God meets with Jacob one more time in Bethel when he saw the vision of God, in the stairway by laying his head on a rock. 20 years later, more than that, about 28 years later, he ends up back at the same place. God told him to go there. And after that, 28 years later, he says, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will come from your body. And the land I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I also give to you. And I will give this land to your descendants after you. Then God went up for him from the place where he had talked with him. That was at Bethel. You know what that means? The nation of Israel was born right there at Bethel. That's where Israel began. This is Genesis stuff. This is really, really old stuff. So I wanted to just show you that. And then Shechem, I'm going to go through that real fast, but Shechem is, of course, a very, very important Old Testament site. But I want to wrap this up again. I was a little late last night, and I'm going to do it again here. By the way, Britt can tell you all about these things. This, by the way, is Jacob's well. There in Shechem, where the woman at the well was. It didn't look like this in Jesus' day, but that's a very deep well. You see the woman's got a cup there. She's not drinking. She's going to pour water down the well. And as she does, when you pour water down that well, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, splash. They won't let you put rocks down there. It'll fill up with the tourists, right? But water you can pour down there. It's really deep. This is where Jesus met with the woman at the well. Here, it's in the basement of a Greek Orthodox church in Nablus, which is now modern name. It's a Palestinian area, but for Shechem. So I just wanted to point that out. That's a well cap, by the way. That's not a millstone. It would be laying over flat, and then over that square area there, you would have another stone. And this is the type of thing where you would use the flat area of that stone laying flat like a wheel that's been dumped on the ground to put your jars on so you could work off of it. Jesus sat on one of those when the woman came up. Now you can see how he sat on the well. That's how it worked in those days. So the upper room. This is a room that's back into Jerusalem. Now we are back onto Mount Zion. We're inside the walls of Jerusalem. This room is commemorating where the Last Supper took place. But the Last Supper did not take place in this room. The room is Crusader. Look at the columns. Look at the top. Those are Gothic vaults. So in other words, they're Crusader era. But this building, this room, which has been turned into a mosque, by the way, if you didn't notice, those things are found in mosques. When Saladin conquered it, that's what he did. But this room may be taking up the same cubic feet of air that the actual Last Supper room took place in. There's some archaeological reasons for that. That's a whole sermon in and of itself. But this is on or near the place where Jesus had the actual Last Supper. And as you know, I'm a big fan of that study. So I like this place. Oh, by the way, that was Kathy standing there. So, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Why did I put this here? Because this is the most important relic, Christian relic, in the world. When I say relic, it means a holy thing, a holy object that points to God or somehow makes you think about God. It's one of the ugliest churches in the world. That's the plaza out in front that I mentioned. Somebody set a bomb off there once. And you can see there's a door on the left where people enter this big, ugly church. But this church is believed to be the place that underneath this church, underneath, as you go in and you can see it, is the tomb of Jesus and also Golgotha Rock where Jesus was crucified. Now, I'm showing you this picture for a very important reason. This little structure right here, it's closed to the public, but it used to be open. You could walk up these steps, go in here and walk up in there, and it's a chapel. And right underneath this area right here is what is said by some to be Golgotha Rock. It may or may not be, but some people say so. Now, Jesus was not crucified on Golgotha Rock. He was crucified at the place of the skull, not on it. They never crucified people away from roads. You had to be alongside a road to see, to smell the person rotting on the cross. I'm sorry, it's disgusting. To be able to read the sign, because you need to know if you can read why that guy is hanging on the cross. You got to be close enough. They're not going to crucify him up on a hill. Sorry, it burst your bubble, but that's the way it is. But this was a chapel. The other word for Golgotha is Calvary, and that literally is Calvary Chapel, right there. I don't know if that's where the name originally came from, but that, if you ask in Jerusalem, where is Calvary Chapel, somebody will point to that right there. That's Calvary Chapel. But you go inside the church, and here's a platform. You go inside, you go to the right up a flight of stairs. So look at this under the glass. You've got this big giant rock there, which is part of the bedrock. Of course, this is an altar, and you have to get down on your knees, and you can reach through a hole right here. This is Deanne, that's Pastor Jim, and you can touch the top of the rock. And people will say, this is where Jesus was crucified. No, he was crucified at the place of the skull, not on it. But that doesn't make this place any less interesting. And what if it is the right spot? Not where Jesus was crucified, but the right marker to say he was crucified in the area. And then further from the top of that mezzanine looking down, then you see this thing. People say that this is where Jesus' body was laid after he was taken down from the cross. No way. That was put there 250 years ago. So, of course, they're going to keep the rock where they lay out his body, and everybody's going to remember where they did it, right? Not a chance. But that's what people do. They'll kneel down there. They keep oil on this thing, the priests, and, of course, people rub their handkerchiefs on it and take it home because it's a relic now. They've been a pilgrim to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where Jesus was crucified, and eventually Jesus rose from the dead. In this picture here, Golgotha Rock is behind me. You go down the stairs, walk this way, turn to the right, and this is what you see. There's that Baroque tomb that used to be a cave. And then it was, of course, turned into a mausoleum by being carved out of the mountainside. Then it was destroyed completely in 1007 and then rebuilt by the Crusaders and then remodeled by a bunch of other people till finally this is a Baroque remodel of the tomb. The entrance is over here. This is supposed to be the tomb of Jesus. Is it? It's possible. Is it likely? Flip a coin. The controversy is which one? The answer is, hey, they're both empty. Who cares? But this is a big deal to most Christians. And of course, Helena, the mother of Constantine, built the original church over this, and it became the holiest church in all the world, this one in Jerusalem. It's burned down, it's been destroyed, rebuilt, all of these things over the centuries, but that's the tomb. Go inside, this is what you see. Recently it was remodeled, and they even had archaeologists remove these panels of stone to get down to the bedrock. They found a cross carved in it that was a Crusader age cross. But the problem with this is that, as I said, it was taken all the way to the ground. This is an Orthodox woman, Christian Orthodox. She may be Armenian Orthodox. She could be Coptic. I'm not sure which. But the reason she's praying here at the base of that tomb on the outside, the entrance is around that way, is because the bedrock is down here somewhere. She knows enough to know that the tomb was destroyed. And if she wants to touch something holy, the tomb that Jesus was actually buried in, the bedrock from it, it's down here by where she's kneeling. That's why she's there. So it just tells you the place is a relic. It's a holy relic. And if you go in there, you have to take it in faith that this is the real thing. But could it be the right location? It's possible. This is also a great place of hypocrisy. This is at night. This is the entrance to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they're about to board the place up for the night. When they go to shut it down, you have a group of people there every night that gather to watch, and the people there who shut the place down just laugh. You could be there, and they just laugh at you. Because the 7 different Christian sects that run the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and oversee this thing, they don't get along at all. Fist fights break out between the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox and the Armenian Orthodox and the Coptics and everybody else. They just hate each other in there. And who gets the key to the front door? So for 900 years, they couldn't decide who gets the key to the front door, so they invited a Muslim family to come and live inside the church, and they gave the Muslims the key, because they're considered the neutral party. And the descendants of the same family still live inside that church. And every night, they shut that door. There's a ladder that goes up to where the lock is, and the guy gets on the ladder, locks the lock, gets down with the key, hands the key to the person on the inside. There's a little hatch there, and then they pass the ladder up to the person through the hatch, who pulls it in, shuts the hatch until morning when they open it up again. It's done by Muslims because the Christians can't get along. Folks, we are called to be one at all times, whether you like each other or not. We are family, and nothing changes that, because God is our Father, Jesus is our big brother, and the Holy Spirit is the same Spirit in me that's in you, and you and me, and all of us, and not just in this room, but every Christian everywhere who professes Jesus as Savior and Lord. That is really a shameful thing that you're looking at right there. There you can see the ladder, the hatch. They're about ready to close the door. Last things. Garden of Gethsemane. This is what it looked like 100 or so years ago. All of this is the Garden of Gethsemane. It was a huge olive grove in the time of Jesus. Those are not the original trees. They were all cut down by the Romans or used to crucify Jews on. They crucified 50,000 Jews on olive trees in and out of Jerusalem. They also cut down a lot of the olive trees in order to burn parts of the Temple Mount after the conquest. But all of this is the Garden of Gethsemane. Then they built this church here. See, it snows in Jerusalem. Isn't that pretty cool? This is the Mount of Olives up in here. That's the church of Mary Magdalene up there. But this is the church that's built over the Garden of Gethsemane, which isn't just here. It's all up in here, all over here, and way back over there. It's a big, big place. Where did Jesus pray? We don't know. But somewhere around there, that is definitely it. Historically, this is where he prayed. This is inside the enclosure of that church in the courtyard there. These trees are really, really old, but they're not from the time of Jesus. They're too young. Olive trees don't have it in their DNA to die. They just don't. But you can kill them. But if you cut them down, if you ever owned an olive tree, you cut it down, they sprout. And they just keep right on growing. So you can cut them down right down to the nub, and they're going to keep sprouting. So these trees, they could have been there when Jesus was praying in the area. So the root systems, anyway, could probably tell you what he sounded like, or what, the great drops of blood may have even watered their roots, the bloody sweat that he bled. But it could have been in this area right here. And you can see again, they turned it into a very nice garden, but it was not a pretty garden. It was an agricultural garden. You've got to remember, in the Bible, they didn't have gardens like we have gardens. They were agricultural gardens, vineyards and olive groves and that sort of a thing. That's what this was. This is inside what's left of the Antonia fortress. All that's left of the Antonia fortress is the floor. Why am I doing this? Because it's very likely that Jesus was flogged in this area back in here, and that he carried the cross out. This indicates a road. They put notches on the limestone so that the horses could get traction while walking on the limestone, because limestone is very slippery. So that indicates a road. Jesus very likely had carried the cross on those very stones that you're seeing right there and bled on those. Then this takes us over to the garden tomb. The garden tomb is the other possible, probable location of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. Could have been there too. This is what it looked like 100 years ago. More than that, a man named General Chinese Gordon, they called him, because he did a lot of his fighting in China, was in Israel. He's the same guy that, by the way, guarded Khartoum and died there, if you'd ever read the story of Khartoum or even seen the movie. Not cartoon, Khartoum, which is in Sudan. But he saw this rock formation here, and he said, that looks like a skull. I wonder if that's where Jesus was crucified. Well, it's possible. That's the place of the skull. That has they call it Gordon's Calvary. Jesus, if he was crucified there, was not crucified on top of that thing, but in front of it, right about where the picture was being taken from, because there's an ancient road that is now paved and a bus station that's now put there for the Palestinians. But it doesn't change the fact that's where the cross would have stood if it stood anywhere near this place, right about the base of this picture, right in here. It's also a very likely place where Stephen was actually stoned, because it was known for execution and stoning back in those times. I've gone way over, but you can see it's in the back of this is where it is now, and look at all the buses. Palestinian bus station, a mosque over here. That's not a cave, that's an old cistern, because the front of the whole thing was taken off at some point historically and broken down on a cliff. But one day, somebody, after looking at I wonder if that's it, this looks like a place of a skull, there was this tomb down here, and it's underground. You could go down in there, and they kept donkeys in there. It was like a stable. And then they finally excavated it away, and that's what they found. And this has become known as the Garden Tomb. It does fit the biblical description, because there is a certain physical description of the tomb that Jesus was buried in the Gospel of John. This fits the description far better than what anything that the one over at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre does. That once again, it doesn't mean the Church of the Holy Sepulchre isn't the right place, and it doesn't mean this one is. But chances are it's one or the other. It could be another place that hasn't been found. But the bottom line is, as I already said, that there's nobody in there. This is a cistern because it was in a garden, remember? The cistern was there to water a vineyard, because they also had they found a wine press, so they knew it was a vineyard. And that was used for watering it. That's right underneath all of this. But that's what the Garden Tomb looks like today. All those blocks on the side, part of it was broken out at one point in history. It just sort of caved in. And before they turned it into a donkey stable, somebody put those blocks there and actually made the entrance a little taller, just to get animals in and out of there, several hundred years ago, and they've been using it that way ever since. But on the inside, they found a cross emblazoned on the side, a Byzantine cross, which means way back then it was probably part of a church or a chapel. And as you can see, it's rounded here, right here. See the rounded part there? That means it was part of a church. And it was you don't put a tomb, a real honest-to-goodness tomb, in a church. It would be considered unclean, just like for the Jews. Why was this venerated as a chapel or a church at some point in time? Let me think. Maybe it's real. So you can go in and visit. This is the inside. Here's the cross over here. Jesus would have been here if this was the right place, because you could come into a room. There's bars right here. This picture's taken through the bars because they don't want you going in there picking it apart as a tourist. But you can look in here. The weeping chamber's here, and there would have been a slab of stone across here and across here and across here. And Jesus' body would have been here by biblical description. So the slab is obviously gone, but if this is the right place, that's where he would have been. So you would have had an angel here and meeting outside, and Jesus would have met Mary Magdalene outside of this thing. There's a stone that they have out in front. This is not the stone. This is just a stone that they put there to give you an idea of what a rolling stone would have been like, except the one in front of Jesus' tomb, by the Greek description that you have, probably was a lot bigger and much, much heavier. And, of course, in Jerusalem, the stones have a story to tell, like that stone, like the stone of Golgotha Rock, like the stone of the Garden Tomb, or maybe the tomb in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But the stones have a story to tell, and that one tells you he is not here, he is risen. So thanks for coming to Israel with me. And if you want to come to Jerusalem, as the expression goes among all the Jews who live outside of Israel, next year in Jerusalem, who knows? Maybe that'll be you. So let's pray. Father, thank you for tonight, for last night, for just showing us these things. And Father, I pray that as we read our Bible, we'll see a whole new world open up before us, knowing that all of these things are things that you obviously put there for us to see with our mind's eye. As we read the accounts that are there in the Bible, that every story has a picture that goes with it. Thank you for giving us these pictures. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. thanks you guys for coming tonight. And if you have any questions, come and grab me because it's late. So, all right.